You probably clicked on this to fall asleep, but before we start, drop a like and subscribe. Now dim your lights and let the darkness begin. The Gloomhaven Recycling Center, even on a good day, was a symphony of clanging metal and the groan of overloaded machinery, punctuated by the shouts of weary workers. But during the blackout, it was something else entirely. The usual cacophony was muted, replaced by an oppressive silence broken only by the rhythmic whir of the emergency generators powering the skeletal lighting and essential sorting equipment. Anya, perched precariously on a mountain of discarded electronics, adjusted her headlamp, its beam cutting a weak swathe through the cavernous gloom. The air, thick with the metallic tang of scrap and the pervasive smog that clung to Gloomhaven even in the best of times, felt heavier, almost viscous in the unnatural darkness. Another day, another mountain of someone else's crap, she muttered, her breath misting slightly in the cool, damp air of the warehouse. Anya wasn't exactly thrilled about working overtime during a citywide blackout, especially not when half the city was likely descending into chaos. But Gloomhaven, in its infinite wisdom, considered recycling an essential service. Or perhaps more accurately, Bright Corp, who effectively owned and operated the city in all but name, considered it essential. After all, even in darkness, the gears of consumerism must grind on, and the waste they produced had to go somewhere. And that somewhere, more often than not, ended up here. Anya was a creature of Gloomhaven's underbelly. Cynicism was practically a second skin, molded by years of breathing polluted air and witnessing the city's relentless decay masked by Bright Corp's hollow promises of a brighter future. She's seen the syndicate's tendrils reach into every corner of the city, felt the weight of the order's hollow pronouncements on her soul, and watched Bright Corp's towers pierce the smog-choked sky, monuments to their own insatiable greed. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, and optimism was a fool's errand in a city perpetually shrouded in twilight. Tonight, her task was sorting through a fresh shipment of e-waste, mostly phones and tablets, collected in the frantic pre-blackout clearouts. People in their panic dumped everything, hoping to salvage what little space and power they had for the essentials. Anya was supposed to separate the functional from the truly dead, the salvageable from the scrap heap. A tedious job on a normal day, tonight it felt almost absurdly pointless. Who cared about recycling when the city was in freefall? But orders were orders, and Anya needed the overtime pay. Rent in Gloomhaven, even in the shadowed fringes, was a vampire that demanded constant feeding. She sifted through the pile, her gloved hands moving with practiced ease. Cracked screens, shattered casings, tangled wires, the detritus of a hyper-connected world abruptly severed from its power source. Most of the phones were inert bricks, their screens dark and cold. But then she noticed something odd. A faint, flickering glow emanating from a cluster of phones near the bottom of the pile. Huh, she grunted, nudging aside a mangled laptop. Power surges during blackouts were common, if unpredictable. Maybe some residual charge was kicking in, making the dead screen stutter back to life. She approached cautiously, expecting to see the familiar splash screen of some defunct mobile OS, or perhaps just static. What she saw instead made her pause. Not just one phone, but dozens, maybe even hundreds scattered throughout the pile, were displaying the same message. Faintly illuminated in a sickly green font against the black screens, the words glowed with an unsettling uniformity. Beware the umbra, it hungers. Anya blinked, thinking her headlamp was playing tricks on her. She rubbed her eyes, then leaned closer, picking up one of the phones. A cheap, generic model, probably outdated even before it was discarded. The screen displayed the message, stark and unwavering. She flipped it over, checked the battery compartment, empty. Dead, completely and utterly dead. Yet the screen was lit, displaying the same cryptic phrase as all the others. What in the, she muttered, her cynicism momentarily faltering. This wasn't a power surge, this was something else. She picked up another phone, a different model, more expensive, its screen cracked and spiderwebbed. Same message. Another and another and another. Each one undeniably dead, yet each displaying the same chilling warning. A wave of unease washed over Anya, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Cynicism was a shield, a comfortable armor against the absurdities of Gloomhaven. But this was beyond absurd. This was wrong. She started digging through the pile more frantically, tossing aside layers of plastic and metal to uncover more phones. The sheer scale of it was staggering. Dozens became hundreds, maybe even more. Everywhere she looked, amidst the discarded electronics, the same message glowed, a silent chorus of digital warnings in the oppressive darkness. Beware the umbra, it hungers. The words echoed in her mind, their meaning elusive, their presence deeply unsettling. Umbra, shadow, darkness. In Gloomhaven, darkness was hardly a novelty. It was the city's constant companion, the smog-choked twilight its defining characteristic. But this felt different. This felt deliberate. Anya tried to rationalize it, to force it back into the comfortable box of cynicism. Glitch in the system, some kind of elaborate prank, mass hacking before the blackout, but none of it quite fit. A glitch on the scale seemed improbable. A prank this widespread, targeting dead phones in a recycling center during a citywide blackout, absurd, and hacking dead phones, that defied logic. She pulled out her own phone, a battered but reliable device she'd managed to keep in working order despite its age. No service, of course. The blackout had taken down the cell towers along with everything else. She tried to access the files, the apps, nothing. Dead as a doornail, just like all the others. Except her phone was silent, dark, no cryptic messages, just the cold, unyielding blackness of a dead screen. Why hers? Why these hundreds of others? What made them special or cursed or whatever bizarre phenomenon was causing this? The silence of the recycling center, punctuated only by the low hum of the generators, seemed to press in on her. The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows that danced and flickered, making the mountains of scrap look like grotesque, slumbering beasts. The air grew colder, or perhaps it was just the chill of unease creeping into her bones. Anya walked away from the pile of phones, pacing restlessly in the narrow space between the mountains of e-waste and the towering walls of the warehouse. She needed to think, to make sense of this. Cynicism was all well and good, but it wasn't a strategy. Ignoring this wouldn't make it go away. The sheer volume of phones, the uniformity of the message, the unsettling nature of the words themselves, it all pointed to something beyond a simple glitch or prank. Beware the umbra, it hungers. The umbra, the shadow, hunger. What kind of hunger, and what was it warning her to beware of? The blackout itself, something else lurking in the darkness, something ancient. The previous context flashed through her mind. The emergence of an ancient entity, the source of Gloomhaven's perpetual gloom. Could this be connected? Was the message a warning about this entity? And if so, why were dead phones the messengers? Anya scoffed at herself. Ancient entities, cryptic warnings on dead phones. This was the kind of nonsense the Order of the Everlight peddled, not something a pragmatic recycler like herself should be entertaining. And yet, the feeling of unease persisted, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She walked back to the pile of phones, drawn by a morbid curiosity. She picked up another one, a sleek, expensive model that looked barely used, aside from the ominous message glowing on its screen. She examined it closely, running her fingers over the smooth casing, searching for any clue, any explanation. Then she noticed something else. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration coming from the phone. Not a mechanical vibration like a ringtone or notification, more like a pulse. A slow, rhythmic thrumming that resonated in her fingertips. She held the phone to her ear, straining to hear over the hum of the generators and the pounding of her own heart. Faintly, almost too quiet to be real, she could hear it. A low, guttural sound like a distant growl or the rustling of dry leaves in a wind that didn't exist. It was coming from the phone. She pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at it in disbelief. A dead phone, vibrating, making sounds, displaying cryptic messages. This was escalating beyond glitch, beyond prank, beyond anything remotely rational. Anya's cynicism began to crack, fissures appearing in her carefully constructed armor. The rational explanations were crumbling under the weight of the inexplicable. Something was happening here, something strange and unsettling and potentially dangerous. And these dead phones, these silent messengers, were somehow at the heart of it. She needed to understand. She needed to know what the message meant, what the umbra was, and why these phones were chosen to deliver the warning. Ignoring it was no longer an option. The unease had solidified into a cold certainty, Something was coming, something hungry, and the message was a warning. A warning she couldn't afford to ignore. Anya looked around the vast, shadowy warehouse, the mountains of scrap looming like silent witnesses. She was alone except for the whispering phones, their cryptic message glowing in the darkness. She felt a sudden, sharp pang of isolation, a sense of being adrift in a sea of the unknown. But beneath the fear, beneath the unease, a flicker of something else ignited within her. Curiosity, resourcefulness. The ingrained Gloomhaven survival instinct that had kept her afloat in this city of shadows for so long. Cynicism might be her shield, but curiosity was her weapon. And right now, she needed to arm herself. She started gathering the phones, carefully placing them in a large, empty bin. She needed to examine them more closely, to try and understand what connected them, what made them conduits for this strange message. She worked quickly and methodically, her headlamp beam dancing across the mountains of scrap, illuminating the glowing screens like eerie fireflies in the darkness. As she worked, she noticed another detail. The green glow of the messages seemed to be intensifying. Fainter at first, now they were burning brighter, almost pulsating with a strange internal light. And the vibration, the low, guttural sound, seemed to be growing stronger as well, spreading from phone to phone, resonating through the pile. The air in the warehouse felt heavier still, charged with an unseen energy. The shadows seemed to deepen, to coalesce, to take on a more tangible form. Anya felt a prickling sensation on her skin, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end. Something was changing. Something was awakening. She finished gathering the phones, the bin now overflowing with the glowing devices. She backed away slowly, her eyes fixed on the bin, her senses on high alert. The collective glow of the screens was almost blinding now, bathing the surrounding area in an eerie green light. The vibration was no longer subtle. It was a palpable tremor that resonated through the floor, through her bones. And the low, guttural sound had transformed into a chorus, a whispering, rustling murmur that seemed to emanate from the bin itself, from the phones, from the darkness that surrounded them. Beware the umbra, it hungers. The message was no longer just on the screens. It was in the air, in the vibrations, in the very silence of the warehouse, a silent scream echoing in the darkness. Anya felt a primal fear grip her, a fear that transcended cynicism, a fear that spoke to something deep within her, something ancient and instinctive. She knew with a chilling certainty that this was no glitch, no prank. This was real. And whatever the umbra was, whatever it hungered for, it was here, or it was coming. And these dead phones, these cryptic messengers, were just the beginning. Anya took another step back, her eyes wide, her heart pounding in her chest. The bin of phones pulsed with an eerie green light, the whispering chorus growing louder, the shadows deepening, swirling, coalescing. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable sense of anticipation, of dread. Then from the depths of the warehouse, from the impenetrable darkness beyond the reach of her headlamp, she heard it. A sound that made the blood run cold in her veins. A sound that was not mechanical, not human, not anything she had ever heard before. A low, resonant growl, deep and guttural, filled with an ancient hunger, echoing through the vast space, confirming the message, amplifying the fear, and announcing its presence. The umbra was listening, and it was answering. And Anya, the cynical recycler of Gloomhaven, knew with a chilling certainty that her night was about to get a whole lot more complicated. She had stumbled upon something ancient and dangerous, something that had been awakened by the blackout, something that was drawn to the darkness, and something that, judging by the message on the dead phones, was very, very hungry. And she was alone in the dark, with a bin full of whispering warnings, and the growing sense that she was no longer just a witness, but a potential part of its meal. The smooth, metallic tang of fear coated her tongue, a flavor sharper and more real than any smog-choked air she had ever breathed. Her cynical armor, once so comfortable, now felt flimsy and inadequate against the unseen threat that was beginning to stir in the Gloomhaven darkness. She had to figure out what was happening, and fast, before the umbra's hunger turned its attention to her, or worse, to the city itself. And for the first time in a long time, Anya felt a flicker of something other than cynicism, something akin to purpose. She might be just a recycler, just another cog in the Gloomhaven machine, but tonight, in the heart of the blackout, she was the only one who had heard the whispers, the only one who had seen the message. And maybe, just maybe, that meant she was the only one who could do something about it. The growl echoed again, closer now, and Anya knew she couldn't stay here, paralyzed by fear. She had to move, to investigate, to understand. She had to find out what the Umbra was and what it hungered for before it was too late. And that meant leaving the relative safety of the emergency lights and venturing into the Gloomhaven darkness, the very darkness that seemed to be giving birth to something ancient and terrifying. The smooth transition into action was clear. Anya would have to leave the recycling center and seek answers, venturing deeper into the blackout-stricken city to understand the Umbra and the meaning of the cryptic messages. The low growl reverberated through the recycling center, a sound that seemed to vibrate not just in the air, but in the very foundations of the building. Anya's breath hitched in her throat. She spun around, her headlamp beam cutting wildly through the oppressive darkness, searching for the source of the sound. Mountains of e-waste loomed like silent, watchful giants, their metallic surfaces reflecting back fragmented beams of weak emergency light, creating a disorienting landscape of shadow and glint. The growl came again, closer this time, a rumbling tremor that seemed to emanate from the depths of the warehouse, from the inky blackness beyond the immediate circle of emergency lighting. It wasn't an animal sound, not exactly. It was deeper, more resonant, tinged with an ancient quality that sent shivers down Anya's spine. She instinctively backed away from the bin of glowing phones, her heart hammering against her ribs. The green light from the screens pulsed with an unsettling rhythm, casting eerie shadows that danced and writhed on the walls. The whispering murmur from the phones had intensified, becoming a low, sibilant chorus that seemed to crawl into her ears and burrow into her mind. Beware the Umbra, it hungers. The message was no longer just a visual warning. It was a sensory assault, a chilling whisper carried on the very air she breathed. Anya knew she couldn't stay here. The recycling center, once a familiar, albeit grimy, workplace, had transformed into something else entirely, a stage for an unfolding horror she couldn't comprehend. The growl, the whispers, the glowing phones, it was all too much, too strange, too terrifying to ignore. She had to get out of here, at least for now, to think, to plan, to figure out what the hell was going on. But as she turned to leave, a thought struck her, sharp and insistent as a shard of broken glass. These phones, they were the key. They were displaying the message, they were vibrating, they were somehow connected to this Umbra. Leaving them behind felt wrong, like abandoning a crucial piece of the puzzle. Curiosity, that persistent, often reckless trait that had gotten her into trouble more times than she cared to admit, tugged at her, overriding the primal urge to flee. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Anya moved back towards the bin, her headlamp beam fixed on the glowing phones. She needed to examine them more closely, to see if there were any clues, any markings, anything that could explain their strange behavior. Ignoring the lingering growl and the oppressive atmosphere, she reached into the bin and picked up one of the phones, the same sleek, expensive model she had examined earlier. The faint vibration was still there, a rhythmic pulse that resonated in her palm. She turned the phone over, examining its casing. No obvious markings, just the smooth, dark plastic and the cracked screen displaying the ominous green message. She checked the ports, the buttons, the speaker grill. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except for the fact that it was a dead phone, inexplicably glowing and vibrating. She tried another phone, then another, and another, picking them up at random from the bin. Each one was different models, different brands, different levels of damage, but they all shared the same chilling message, the same eerie green glow, the same subtle vibration. It was as if they were all part of some macabre network, broadcasting the same warning from beyond the digital grave. Anya's eyes scanned the phones, searching for any commonality, any thread that could connect them. Then she noticed something. On the back of one of the phones, a cheap, generic model, barely visible beneath a layer of grime and dust, was a small, almost imperceptible sticker. It was faded and torn, but she could just make out a partial address, TH Street, Gloomhaven. Adrenaline surged through her veins, an address, a potential starting point. It was a long shot, but in the suffocating darkness of Gloomhaven, any glimmer of information was precious. She carefully peeled off the sticker, her fingers clumsy in her gloves. The address was incomplete, obscured by wear and tear, but she could make out enough to get a general idea of the location. TH Street, Gloomhaven, near the old docks. The old docks. a notorious part of Gloomhaven, a labyrinth of dilapidated warehouses and shadowed alleyways, a haven for the Shadow Syndicate and other unsavory elements. It was a dangerous place even in broad daylight, and during a citywide blackout, it was likely to be a descent into absolute chaos. But the address, incomplete as it was, offered a direction, a thread to pull on in the tangled web of the Umbra's mystery. Anya tucked the sticker carefully into her pocket, her mind racing. She needed to get to the old docks to try and find the full address to see if it held any answers about the phones and the Umbra. It was a risky move, venturing into the most dangerous part of the city during a blackout, but the cryptic message, the unsettling phenomena, and the growing sense of dread compelled her forward. She glanced back at the bin of phones, the green glow pulsating like a malevolent heartbeat. The growling sound seemed to have receded, but the whispering chorus persisted, a constant, unsettling murmur that filled the silence of the warehouse. Anya knew she couldn't stay here any longer. The recycling center felt tainted, corrupted by the Umbra's presence. She needed to move, to investigate, to take action before whatever was happening escalated further. Grabbing her backpack and slinging it over her shoulder, Anya turned and headed towards the exit of the warehouse, her headlamp beam cutting a swathe through the darkness. The emergency lights flickered and hummed, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and shift in her peripheral vision. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy, and the metallic tang of scrap was overlaid with a strange, almost acrid scent that prickled her nostrils. As she walked, she pulled out her own phone, the battered device that remained stubbornly dark and silent. She stared at the blank screen, a wave of frustration washing over her. Why hers? Why was her phone immune to whatever was affecting the others? Was it a different technology, a different network, or was it simply overlooked? She shook her head, dismissing the thought. Rationalizing this was proving futile. Logic and cynicism were failing her in the face of the inexplicable. Something beyond her understanding was at play, something ancient and powerful, and these dead phones were somehow connected to it. Reaching the loading bay doors, Anya hesitated for a moment, peering out into the inky blackness of Gloomhaven. The city was swallowed by darkness, a void punctuated only by the faint, scattered pinpricks of emergency lights and the occasional flickering glow of a makeshift fire. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the distant wail of sirens and the low hum of the city's unseen infrastructure. A silence that felt heavy, oppressive, pregnant with unseen dangers. Taking another deep breath, Anya pushed open the heavy loading bay doors and stepped out into the Gloomhaven night. The cold, smog-laden air hit her face, carrying the familiar scent of decay and desperation. But tonight it felt different, tainted with a new, unsettling element, a palpable sense of dread that clung to the darkness like a shroud. She started walking, her headlamp beam cutting a narrow path through the gloom. The streets were deserted, eerily silent. Even in Gloomhaven's underbelly, there was usually some sign of life, some flicker of activity, even during a blackout. But tonight, the city felt empty, abandoned, as if everyone had retreated into the shadows, waiting, watching, or perhaps hiding. As Anya navigated the darkened streets, the image of the glowing phones flashed in her mind, the cryptic message burning against the black screens. "Beware the Umbra, it hungers." The words echoed in her thoughts, their meaning elusive, their presence deeply unsettling. What was the Umbra, and what did it hunger for? She tried to recall any stories, any rumors, any whispers she had heard about the Umbra in Gloomhaven's shadowed corners. The name sounded vaguely familiar, like a half-forgotten legend, a whispered warning from the city's darker past. But nothing concrete came to mind, just a sense of unease, a feeling that the Umbra was something ancient, something malevolent, something connected to the darkness that perpetually shrouded Gloomhaven. As she walked deeper into the city, the silence began to feel less empty and more watchful. Anya had the unsettling sensation of being observed, of unseen eyes watching her from the shadows. She glanced over her shoulder repeatedly, her headlamp beam sweeping across the darkened alleyways and the towering, silent buildings, but she saw nothing, just the oppressive darkness and the long, distorted shadows cast by her own light. The feeling persisted, growing stronger with each step, a prickling sensation on her skin, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, sentient, aware of her presence, watching her, waiting. Suddenly a sound pierced the silence, a sharp, metallic clang that echoed through the deserted streets. Anya froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She spun around, her headlamp beam snapping to attention, scanning the darkness. Nothing, just the silent, shadowed streets and the looming buildings. The clang came again, closer this time, followed by a scraping sound like metal dragging against concrete. Anya moved cautiously towards the sound, her senses on high alert. She crept along the edge of a building, her back pressed against the cold brick, her headlamp beam cutting through the darkness. Rounding a corner, she saw it. A overturned dumpster lying on its side in the middle of the street, its contents spilled across the pavement. And beside it, a shadowy figure hunched over, rummaging through the debris. Anya instinctively tensed, her hand reaching for the small utility knife she always carried in her pocket. Was it a syndicate thug, a desperate looter, or something else entirely? She couldn't tell in the darkness, the figure shrouded in shadow, its features obscured by the gloom. She approached cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the debris-strewn street. As she got closer, the figure straightened up, turning towards her, its face still hidden in shadow. Anya raised her headlamp beam, focusing it on the figure, and gasped. It wasn't human, not entirely. It was humanoid in shape, but its limbs were too long, too thin, its movements too jerky, too unnatural. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes glowed with a faint, sickly green light, the same eerie green as the messages on the phones. The figure stared at Anya, its glowing green eyes fixed on her, and a low, guttural growl rumbled in its chest, a sound that echoed the growl she had heard in the recycling center. A wave of cold dread washed over Anya, a primal fear that paralyzed her for a moment. This wasn't a syndicate thug. This wasn't a looter. This was something else, something connected to the Umbra. The figure took a step towards her, its movements fluid and unsettlingly fast. Anya snapped out of her paralysis, adrenaline surging through her veins. She didn't know what this thing was, but she knew it was dangerous. She raised her utility knife, the small blade glinting weakly in the dim light, a pathetic defense against whatever this creature was. "Stay back," she yelled, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to sound strong. The figure didn't stop. It continued to advance, its glowing green eyes fixed on her, its low growl growing louder, more menacing. Anya knew she couldn't fight it. Not here, not now, not with just a utility knife against whatever this was. She had to run. Turning on her heel, Anya sprinted back the way she had come, her headlamp beam bouncing wildly, illuminating the darkened streets and the looming buildings. She could hear the figure behind her, its footsteps light but rapid, gaining on her. Fear lent her speed, adrenaline pumping through her veins, driving her forward. She ran blindly, her only goal to escape, to put distance between herself and the creature. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care. Just away from the glowing green eyes, away from the guttural growl, away from the terrifying presence of the Umbra's messenger. As she ran, images flashed in her mind, disjointed, unsettling visions that seemed to intrude on her thoughts, unbidden and unwelcome. Shadowy figures lurking in the darkness, their forms indistinct and shifting, their eyes glowing with the same eerie green light. Whispers in the darkness, sibilant and unintelligible, yet somehow menacing. A sense of vast, ancient hunger, a cold, consuming emptiness that seemed to emanate from the shadows themselves. The visions were fleeting, fragmented, but they were enough to plant seeds of terror in Anya's mind, to amplify the fear that already gripped her. She wasn't just running from a creature in the darkness. She was running from something far more profound, something ancient and malevolent, something that was awakening in Gloomhaven's blackout. She stumbled, her foot catching on a loose cobblestone, and she almost fell. Righting herself just in time, she kept running, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her lungs burning. She glanced over her shoulder and saw the figure gaining on her, its movements unnervingly swift and silent. The green glow of its eyes was closer now, brighter, more intense. Desperation clawed at Anya. She had to find somewhere to hide, somewhere to escape the creature's pursuit. She spotted an alleyway, narrow and dark, cutting between two towering buildings. It was a risky move, venturing into the darkness of an alley, but it was her only chance. Without hesitation, she veered into the alley, plunging into deeper darkness, the meager light from her headlamp swallowed by the shadows. The alley was claustrophobic, the walls closing in on her, the air thick with the stench of decay and dampness. She ran blindly, her hands outstretched, feeling for obstacles in the darkness. She could still hear the figure behind her, its footsteps echoing in the narrow space, closing in. The green glow of its eyes flickered in the darkness behind her, a malevolent beacon in the oppressive gloom. Anya knew she couldn't outrun it forever. She had to find a hiding place, a refuge, however temporary. She spotted a doorway recessed into the wall of one of the buildings, a heavy wooden door shrouded in shadow. It looked old, dilapidated, but it offered a chance, a sliver of hope in the overwhelming darkness. She ran towards the doorway, her heart pounding, her breath ragged. Reaching the door, she fumbled for the handle, her fingers trembling. It was cold, metallic, rusted with age. She pulled, and the door creaked open with a groan, revealing a dark, musty interior. Without hesitation, she slipped inside, pulling the door closed behind her, plunging herself into absolute darkness. She leaned against the door, her chest heaving, her ears straining to hear any sound from outside. The alleyway was silent, except for the pounding of her own heart and the rasping of her breath. Had she lost it? Had she escaped the creature's pursuit? She couldn't be sure. The darkness inside was absolute, impenetrable. She couldn't see anything, not even her hand in front of her face. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, and a damp, musty odor that made her nostrils wrinkle. She fumbled for her headlamp, switching it off to conserve battery power, plunging herself into even deeper darkness. She stood there for a moment, listening, waiting, her senses on high alert. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the city's unseen infrastructure and the faint whispers of the wind through the cracks in the building. No sound of pursuit, no guttural growl, no glowing green eyes in the darkness. Had she lost it? Or was it still out there, waiting, watching, lurking in the shadows, its ancient hunger driving it forward? Anya didn't know, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just a recycler in Gloomhaven. She was caught in something far bigger, far more dangerous, something ancient and terrifying that had awakened in the darkness and was now stalking the streets of her city. And the cryptic message on the dead phones, "Beware the Umbra, it hungers," was no longer just a warning. It was a prophecy, a chilling glimpse into the horrifying reality that was beginning to unfold in Gloomhaven's perpetual twilight. And Anya, armed only with her cynicism and a flickering headlamp, was now caught in the heart of it, with no idea what to do next, except to survive. The weight of the unknown pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating as the smog-choked air of Gloomhaven, and she knew with a chilling certainty that her investigation into the dead phones and their cryptic message had just taken a terrifying and irreversible turn. The pursuit by the shadowy figure was not just a random encounter. It was a direct consequence of her curiosity, a clear sign that the Umbra was aware of her, and that her quest for answers had placed her directly in its path. And as she stood there in the suffocating darkness, the whispers of the phones echoing in her mind, Anya knew that her night, and perhaps Gloomhaven itself, was about to become a battleground in an ancient and terrifying war. A war waged in the shadows, fueled by hunger, and heralded by cryptic messages on dead phones. The smooth transition into the next part of the story was now set. Anya, having escaped the shadowy figure, needs to understand what she encountered and what the Umbra truly is, leading her to delve deeper into Gloomhaven's hidden history and the potential origins of this ancient entity. Anya pressed herself against the cold, damp wood of the door, listening intently. The alleyway remained silent, the oppressive Gloomhaven silence swallowing all other sounds. She slowly allowed herself to breathe, the air in the confined space thick with the musty odor of decay and forgotten things. Her heart still hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of the city's unnatural stillness. She had escaped for now, but the image of the creature's glowing green eyes burned into her mind, a terrifying beacon in the darkness. She fumbled in her backpack for her water bottle, her hand shaking slightly as she brought it to her lips. The water tasted metallic and stale, but it helped to ground her, to bring her back to the immediate reality of her situation. She was alive, she was hidden, and she had a sliver of information, a partial address gleaned from a sticker on a dead phone. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in the suffocating darkness of Gloomhaven, something was better than nothing. Switching her headlamp back on, its beam cutting a weak circle in the absolute darkness, Anya took stock of her surroundings. She was in a small, windowless space, barely larger than a closet. Dust motes danced in the beam of her headlamp, illuminated against the decaying plaster walls. The air was thick and still, and the silence pressed in on her, amplifying the feeling of isolation. She was alone, truly alone, in a city plunged into darkness, hunted by something she didn't understand, guided only by a cryptic message and a partial address. She needed help. Cynicism and resourcefulness could only take her so far against something that felt so profoundly other. She needed someone who knew Gloomhaven's underbelly, someone who understood the city's shadows, someone who wasn't afraid of the darkness. And one name, a name she hadn't thought of in years, surfaced in her mind: Elias Thorne. Elias Thorne was a disgraced former police detective, a legend in the shadowed corners of Gloomhaven's underworld, whispered about in hushed tones in dimly lit bars and back alleys. He had been a brilliant detective, known for his sharp mind and his relentless pursuit of justice, even in a city where justice was a commodity rarely afforded to those dwelling in the shadows. But then, something had gone wrong. An unsolved case had broken him, shattering his career and leaving him a ghost haunting the edges of Gloomhaven's twilight. Rumor had it he was still in the city, living somewhere in the forgotten districts, drowning his sorrows in cheap liquor and the bitter memories of his past. Anya had crossed paths with Elias years ago, during a brief, ill-advised foray into the Syndicate's territory. He had pulled her out of a tight spot, a situation she'd been too reckless to avoid, and had offered her a gruff warning about staying out of trouble. She hadn't seen him since, but she remembered his eyes, sharp and intelligent, even then clouded with a weariness that seemed to predate his disgrace. Elias Thorne was a long shot, a desperate gamble in a city running out of hope. But he was the only one she could think of who might understand, who might believe her, who might have the knowledge and the experience to make sense of the cryptic message and the shadowy creature. And more importantly, the story outline mentioned Elias and his past case involving similar disappearances during a previous blackout. This was a potential connection, a thread that could lead her out of the darkness. Anya made her decision. She had to find Elias Thorne. It was a risk, venturing out into the blackout again, but staying hidden in this dusty closet wouldn't solve anything. She needed answers, and Elias, in his broken, haunted state, might be the only one who could provide them. She opened the door cautiously, peering out into the alleyway, still silent, still dark. She listened for a moment longer, straining her ears for any sound of pursuit, any sign of the creature. Nothing. Taking a deep breath, she stepped back out into the alley, her headlamp beam cutting through the darkness once more. The alleyway opened onto a wider street, still deserted, still silent. Anya oriented herself, trying to get her bearings in the disorienting darkness. She knew the general direction of the old docks, and she knew Elias was rumored to frequent the bars and shadowed corners of that district. It was a starting point, at least. She set off, walking quickly but cautiously, sticking to the shadows, her senses on high alert. The city remained eerily quiet, but the feeling of being watched persisted, a cold, prickling sensation that kept her on edge. The visions from before, the shadowy figures, the whispers in the dark, flickered at the edges of her mind, adding to the growing unease. As she walked, she pulled out her own phone again, staring at the blank screen. Still nothing. Dead, silent, immune to the strange phenomenon affecting the other phones. She shoved it back into her pocket, a wave of frustration washing over her. It was useless, a relic of a hyperconnected world rendered obsolete by the blackout. The old docks district loomed ahead, a labyrinth of dilapidated warehouses and shadowed alleyways, even darker and more menacing than the rest of the city. The air here was thicker, heavier, carrying the stench of stagnant water and decay. The silence was more profound, broken only by the creaking of rusted metal and the occasional scuttling sound from the shadows. This was Syndicate territory, and during a blackout it was likely to be a lawless zone, a dangerous place for anyone, especially a lone recycler armed with nothing but a utility knife and a flickering headlamp. But Anya had no choice. Elias Thorne was her only hope, and the old docks were the only place she knew to look for him. She ventured into the district, her steps faltering slightly as the darkness deepened and the shadows grew longer, more menacing. The feeling of being watched intensified, becoming almost unbearable, a palpable pressure that weighed down on her, making her breath catch in her throat. She moved deeper into the labyrinthine streets, her headlamp beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, searching for any sign of life, any clue that could lead her to Ilya's thorn. She passed darkened doorways and boarded up windows, the silence broken only by the echo of her own footsteps and the distant, unsettling whispers of the wind. The air grew colder, or perhaps it was just the chill of fear seeping into her bones. After what felt like hours of wandering through the darkened streets, Anya spotted a faint flicker of light emanating from a doorway tucked away in a narrow alleyway. It was a weak, flickering light, barely visible against the oppressive darkness, but it was light nonetheless, a sign of possible human presence in this desolate district. Cautiously, she approached the doorway, her hand instinctively reaching for her utility knife. As she got closer, she could hear the faint murmur of voices from within, muffled and indistinct but definitely human. It was a bar, or some kind of illicit drinking establishment, hidden away in the shadows of the old docks. And if Ilya's thorn was anywhere in this district, it was likely to be in a place like this. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Anya stepped into the doorway, pushing aside a tattered curtain that hung across the entrance. The interior was dimly lit by a few flickering oil lamps, casting long, distorted shadows on the rough-hewn walls and the low, smoke-stained ceiling. The air was thick with the smell of stale liquor, cheap tobacco, and unwashed bodies. A handful of figures were scattered around the room, huddled at tables or slumped at the bar, their faces obscured by shadow and gloom. It was a den of shadows, a refuge for the lost and the forgotten, the kind of place where Ilya's thorn might be found. Anya scanned the room, her eyes adjusting to the dim light, searching for a familiar face, for any sign of the disgraced detective. Most of the faces were unfamiliar, hardened and weary, etched with the harsh realities of Gloomhaven's underbelly. But then, in a dimly lit corner, slumped at a table, a half-empty glass in his hand, she saw him. Ilya's thorn. He was older, more worn down than she remembered, his face etched with deeper lines of weariness and despair. His hair was longer, streaked with gray, and his clothes were rumpled and stained. But his eyes, even in the dim light, still held that spark of intelligence, that flicker of the sharp, observant mind she remembered. He was a ghost of his former self, a shadow of the brilliant detective he once was, but it was him. Anya approached his table cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the sawdust-covered floor. As she got closer, Elias looked up, his eyes, initially unfocused, slowly sharpening as he took her in. Recognition flickered in their depths, a faint spark in the gloom. "Anya," he said, his voice raspy, roughened by years of cheap liquor and disuse. "Is that you? Haven't seen you in years." "Elias," Anya said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's me. I need your help." Elias chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Help? Little late for that, isn't it? Help's a luxury I can't afford and certainly can't provide." He took a long swig from his glass, his eyes drifting away, lost in the haze of his own despair. "This is different, Elias," Anya persisted, pulling up a chair and sitting down opposite him. "It's about something happening in the city, something strange." Elias snorted, his gaze still averted. "Strange, in Gloomhaven. Honey, strange is the baseline here. Polluted air, corrupt corporations, syndicate thugs, religious fanatics, take your pick. What flavor of strange are we talking about tonight?" "This is about the blackout," Anya said, her voice low, urgent. "And something else, something that's come with it." Elias finally looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly, a flicker of interest or perhaps just curiosity in their depths. "The blackout, yeah, that's a mess. Bright Corp's probably sweating bullets, the syndicates having a field day, and the orders probably blaming it on our sins. Business as usual, just darker." "No, it's not business as usual," Anya insisted. "People are disappearing, and there's a message, on dead phones, a warning." Elias frowned, his brow furrowing. "Dead phones, warning, what are you talking about?" Anya reached into her backpack and pulled out one of the phones, the sleek, expensive model she had examined earlier. The green message glowed faintly against the black screen, "Beware the umbra, it hungers." She placed the phone on the table in front of Elias, the eerie green light casting strange shadows on his face. Elias stared at the phone, his eyes widening slightly, a flicker of something akin to shock in their depths. He picked up the phone, turning it over in his hands, examining it closely. "Dead?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharper, more alert. "This phone is dead." "Completely," Anya confirmed. "No power, no battery, but the screen, it's lit. And it's showing the same message as hundreds of others. All dead phones, all with the same warning." Elias examined the phone more closely, running his fingers over the screen, the casing, the ports. He seemed to be shaking off the haze of alcohol and despair, his detective instincts, long dormant, beginning to stir. "Beware the umbra, it hungers," he read aloud, his voice low, thoughtful. "Umbra, shadow, darkness, hunger." He looked up at Anya, his eyes now sharp, focused, the weariness momentarily receding. "Where did you find this?" Anya explained about the recycling center, the mountains of e-waste, the hundreds of phones displaying the same message. She told him about the vibration, the guttural sound, the feeling of unease, the shadowy figure, the glowing green eyes, the pursuit through the darkened streets. As she spoke, Elias listened intently, his gaze fixed on her, his expression growing increasingly serious. The initial dismissal had vanished, replaced by a focused attention, a flicker of the detective he once was. When Anya finished her story, Elias was silent for a long moment, staring at the phone on the table, his brow furrowed in thought. The flickering oil lamps cast dancing shadows on his face, making him look even more haunted, more spectral. "Blackout," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Disappearances, similar messages." He shook his head slowly, as if trying to clear the fog in his mind. "It can't be." "What can't be?" Anya asked, her voice tense with anticipation. "What is it, Elias? Do you know what this means?" Elias looked up at her, his eyes dark, haunted, but now also filled with a strange, unsettling intensity. "Years ago," he began, his voice low, almost a growl. "During the last major blackout, there were disappearances. People vanishing without a trace, just gone, and there were rumors, whispers, messages similar to this one." Anya leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Similar messages? What kind of messages?" Elias hesitated, his gaze drifting away again, lost in the shadows of his past. "Cryptic things," he said finally, his voice strained. "Whispers on the wind, graffiti in the dark, things that didn't make sense at the time. But now with this message, with the disappearances, it's starting to fit. Too damn well." "What kind of disappearances?" Anya pressed, her voice urgent. "Who disappeared?" Elias took another long swig from his glass, his hand trembling slightly. "People from the fringes," he said, his voice low. "The homeless, the forgotten, the ones who lived in the shadows even before the blackout. Nobody paid much attention. Just another statistic in Gloomhaven's endless cycle of decay." "But you paid attention," Anya said, her gaze fixed on him. "Didn't you, Elias? That's why you were disgraced. Because you were investigating these disappearances and nobody wanted you to." Elias was silent for a moment, his gaze lost in the flickering lamplight. Then slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. "I was," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I saw a pattern, a connection, but nobody believed me. They called me obsessed, delusional. They shut me down, buried the case, ruined my career." His voice was bitter, laced with years of resentment and despair. "And the messages," Anya pressed again. "What were the messages back then?" Elias hesitated again, his gaze flickering to the phone on the table, then back to Anya, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and a strange, unsettling fascination. "They were fragmented," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Pieces of warning scattered in the darkness. Things like the shadow's hunger, beware the ancient one, the umbra awakens." Anya's breath hitched in her throat. "Beware the umbra, it hungers," the message on the dead phones. It wasn't just a random warning. It was a recurring message, a chilling echo from Gloomhaven's dark past, a connection to Elias' unsolved case, to the disappearances during the previous blackout. And it was happening again. "The umbra," Anya murmured, the name echoing in her mind, a dark, ominous resonance. "It's not just a shadow, is it? It's something else, something ancient." Elias looked at her, his eyes wide, haunted, but now also filled with a spark of something else, something akin to hope. Or perhaps just a desperate grasp at meaning in the face of overwhelming darkness. "Maybe," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Maybe you're right, Anya. Maybe it's not just a shadow. Maybe it's something more." He reached out and picked up the dead phone again, turning it over in his hands, his gaze fixed on the eerie green message. Beware the umbra, it hungers, he repeated, his voice gaining strength, a flicker of the old detective's intensity returning. Well, Anya, it seems like we have a case. He looked up at her, a grim, determined look in his eyes. Tell me everything. The smooth transition into the next part of the story was clear. Elias, intrigued and haunted by the recurring message and its connection to his past case, decides to help Anya investigate, starting with the details she has gathered and his own fragmented memories of the previous blackout disappearances. Tell me everything, Elias repeated, his gaze intense, the weariness in his eyes momentarily eclipsed by a flicker of something akin to purpose. Anya, emboldened by his sudden shift in demeanor, began to recount her experience from the beginning, starting with her mundane overtime shift at the recycling center. She described the oppressive darkness, the eerie silence, and the discovery of the glowing phones amidst the e-waste. She detailed the cryptic message, the vibration, the guttural sound, and the growing unease that had morphed into chilling fear. She recounted her encounter with the shadowy figure, the glowing green eyes, and the frantic escape through the darkened streets of Gloomhaven. As she spoke, Elias listened intently, his gaze unwavering, occasionally interjecting with sharp, probing questions. He asked about the specifics of the phones, their models, their condition, any other details she might have noticed. He pressed her about the shadowy figure, its appearance, its movements, its behavior. He wanted to understand every detail, every nuance, every sensation she had experienced. The years of detective work, though seemingly buried under layers of despair and alcohol, were clearly still present, a dormant engine now sputtering back to life. When Anya finished her detailed account, Elias leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought, his gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond the smoke-stained ceiling of the bar. The flickering oil lamps cast dancing shadows on his face, highlighting the deep lines of worry etched around his eyes and mouth. The bar, once a refuge of shadows and despair, now felt like a command center, the dim light and hushed atmosphere conducive to their clandestine conversation. The address on the sticker, Elias said finally, his voice low, thoughtful. TH Street, Gloomhaven, near the old docks. That's our starting point. We need to find that address, see if it leads us anywhere. The old docks are syndicate territory, Anya reminded him, her voice cautious. Especially during the blackout, it'll be dangerous. Elias nodded, a grim set to his jaw. Dangerous, yes, but we don't have a choice. This Umbra, it's not going to wait for us to feel safe. If it's connected to the disappearances, if it's feeding on the darkness, then every minute we waste is a minute more it gains strength. We need to understand what we're dealing with, and that address is the only lead we have. What about the phones? Anya asked, gesturing to the sleek, glowing device still resting on the table. They're sending a warning. Why these phones? Why now? Elias picked up the phone again, turning it over in his hands, his gaze fixed on the cryptic message. The phones, they're the messengers, he murmured, his voice low. But messengers of what and for whom? He paused, his brow furrowed in concentration. Think about it, Anya. Dead technology resurrected by something ancient. It's like the Umbra is using the city's own waste, its discarded technology, to communicate, to warn, or maybe to lure. Lure, Anya questioned, a shiver running down her spine. Lure who? Maybe us, Elias said, his gaze meeting hers, his eyes dark and serious. Maybe anyone who's listening, anyone who's paying attention. Maybe the Umbra wants us to know it's here. Maybe it wants us to investigate, or maybe it's just a side effect. A byproduct of its awakening. We don't know yet, but we need to find out. He pushed the phone back towards Anya. Take these phones, he said, indicating the one on the table and the bin full of glowing devices Anya had left at the recycling center. Keep them safe. They might be important. They might be the key to understanding what's happening. What about research? Anya asked. You mentioned ancient texts, forgotten lore. If the Umbra is something ancient, there must be records, stories, something about it. Elias nodded, a spark of his old detective's energy igniting within him. You're right. Gloomhaven has a history, a dark history, buried beneath layers of smog and concrete. We need to dig it up. We need to find any mention of the Umbra, any legends, any warnings. The Order of the Everlight, they claim to worship the sun, to fight against the darkness. They might have something, some ancient texts, some forgotten knowledge. The Order, Anya scoffed, her cynicism resurfacing. They're just a bunch of fanatics spouting nonsense about the sun and sin. They're probably happy about the blackout, think it's some kind of divine punishment. Maybe, Elias conceded, but even fanatics sometimes guard fragments of truth. Their archives, their libraries, they might contain something useful. It's a long shot, but we can't afford to ignore any potential source of information. He paused, thinking. And there's the Gloomhaven City archives, buried deep beneath City Hall, dusty, forgotten, probably filled with more paperwork than actual history. But there might be something there too. Old city records, historical documents, maybe even some forgotten lore about Gloomhaven's origins, its darkness. Bright Corp, Anya said, her voice hardening with suspicion. The outline mentioned Bright Corp's experimental energy technology. Could they be involved? Could they have inadvertently awakened the Umbra? Elias nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. Bright Corp, they're always promising clean energy, a brighter future, but they're also secretive, ruthless, and obsessed with power. They're experimental energy projects, who knows what they're really messing with. They could be digging too deep, reaching for powers they don't understand. The blackout itself, it could be more than just a system failure. It could be a consequence of their experiments. And the Umbra, maybe it was dormant, sleeping, and Bright Corp's technology somehow awakened it. But why would they awaken something like that? Anya asked, her brow furrowed. What would they gain? Maybe they didn't mean to, Elias said, his voice thoughtful. Maybe it was an accident, or maybe they were trying to harness some kind of power, some ancient energy source, and they unleashed something they couldn't control. Bright Corp, they're greedy, ambitious. They might be willing to risk anything for power, even unleashing an ancient entity from the darkness. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. We need to investigate Bright Corp too, Anya. Find out what they've been working on, what experiments they've been conducting. Their headquarters, their research facilities, they're likely heavily guarded, impenetrable, but there might be other ways in. Data leaks, disgruntled employees, whispers in the shadows. We need to find a crack in their wall of secrecy and pry it open. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their task settling upon them, heavy and daunting as the Gloomhaven darkness. The Umbra, an ancient entity awakened by the blackout, possibly connected to Bright Corp's experiments, feeding on the city's darkness, sending cryptic warnings through dead phones, and now hunting in the shadows. It was a terrifying picture, a conspiracy woven into the very fabric of Gloomhaven's twilight. So what do we do first? Anya asked, breaking the silence, her voice determined despite the fear that still gnawed at her. The address, the order, the city archives, Bright Corp. Elias took another deep breath, the flicker of purpose in his eyes solidifying into a grim determination. First, the address, he said, his voice firm. We need to find out what's there, who lived there, what connection it has to the phones, to the Umbra. Then we split up. You try to find information about the Umbra, any ancient lore, any forgotten texts. Start with the order, see if you can get access to their archives. I'll try to dig into Bright Corp, see if I can find any whispers about their experiments, any anomalies connected to the blackout. And the city archives, Anya asked. We'll hit the city archives too, Elias said, but that's a longer shot. It'll take time to sift through all that bureaucratic garbage. Let's focus on the address and the order first, see what we can uncover quickly. Time is not on our side, Anya. The Umbra, it's hungering, and the longer we wait, the stronger it gets. He stood up, his movements stiff, his joints creaking slightly. Let's go, he said, his voice decisive. We need to get to that address, tonight, before it's too late. Anya nodded, a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins, pushing back the fear, replacing it with a sense of grim purpose. She was no longer just a cynical recycler, sifting through mountains of e-waste in the Gloomhaven darkness. She was an investigator, a seeker of truth, embarking on a perilous journey into the heart of the city's shadows, guided by a cryptic message and a reluctant, haunted detective. The smooth, metallic tang of fear was still there, coating her tongue, but now it was mingled with something else, something sharper, more potent, the taste of resolve. They left the dimly lit bar, stepping back out into the oppressive Gloomhaven night. The old docks district was even darker, even more menacing than before. The silence was heavier, punctuated only by the distant creaking of rusted metal and the whispering murmur of the wind through the dilapidated buildings. The feeling of being watched intensified, a palpable presence lurking in the shadows, a silent witness to their every move. Elias led the way, his movements surprisingly agile for a man who seemed so worn down and broken. He navigated the labyrinthine streets with a sure-footedness born of years spent patrolling Gloomhaven's underbelly, his senses sharp, his gaze scanning the shadows, alert for any sign of danger. Anya followed close behind, her headlamp beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the narrow path ahead, her hand instinctively resting on the utility knife in her pocket. As they walked, Elias pulled out a small, battered notebook and a stubby pencil. "Tell me the address again," he said, his voice low. Anya repeated the fragmented address from the sticker, TH Street, Gloomhaven, near the old docks. Elias scribbled it down in his notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. TH Street near the old docks. There are a few streets that fit that description. We'll have to check them all, house by house, building by building. "It could take hours," Anya said, her voice laced with concern. "And who knows what we'll find when we get there. It could be a trap." "It's a risk we have to take," Elias said, his voice firm. "We don't have any other leads, and we can't just sit here and wait for the Umbra to come for us. We need to be proactive, to take the fight to it, to understand its hunger, its purpose, its weakness." They continued their search, moving through the darkened streets of the old docks, their headlamp beams cutting through the oppressive gloom, their senses on high alert. The silence of the city was broken only by their footsteps and the distant, unsettling whispers of the wind. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, the feeling of dread more palpable with each step they took deeper into the heart of the Gloomhaven darkness. The hunt for the address, for the truth behind the cryptic message, for the secrets of the Umbra had begun. And Anya and Elias, two unlikely allies bound by a shared unease and a desperate need for answers, were venturing into the shadows, unaware of the dangers that lurked ahead, unaware of the ancient entity that was listening, waiting, and hungering in the darkness of Gloomhaven. The transition to uncovering the address and beginning their research was now underway, setting the stage for the next phase of their investigation and the escalating dangers they would face as they delved deeper into the mystery of the Umbra. They moved in silence for a time, the only sounds their footsteps echoing in the deserted streets and the low hum of the city's unseen machinery. The darkness of the old docks seemed to press in on them, a tangible weight, and the feeling of being watched intensified, a sense of unseen eyes following their every move. Anya kept glancing over her shoulder, her headlamp beam sweeping across the darkened alleyways and the looming warehouses, but she saw nothing, only shadows and the oppressive gloom. Yet the feeling persisted, a cold, prickling sensation on her skin, a certainty that they were not alone in the darkness. "We're being watched," Anya murmured, her voice barely audible above the silence. Elias stopped, turning to face her, his gaze sharp, alert. "I feel it too," he said, his voice low. "Someone's out there, syndicate probably. They own these streets even in the dark." He scanned the shadows, his eyes narrowed. "Keep your eyes open and stay close." They continued their search, moving more cautiously now, sticking to the deeper shadows, their footsteps muffled, their senses on high alert. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, morphing into a sense of being hunted. Anya could almost feel the presence of their unseen observers, lurking just beyond the reach of her headlamp beam, their eyes fixed on them in the darkness. The air crackled with tension, a silent warning that they were no longer just searching for an address. They were walking into something dangerous, something that was aware of their presence and was not happy about it. They checked several streets that fit the fragmented address, their headlamp beams sweeping across the darkened facades of dilapidated buildings, searching for street signs, house numbers, any clue that could lead them to their destination. Each street was the same, deserted, silent, shrouded in darkness, the buildings looming like empty shells, their windows like vacant eyes staring out into the void. The old docks district was a labyrinth of decay and desperation, a place where shadows thrived and secrets festered, a perfect hunting ground for unseen predators. As they turned onto another street, Elias stopped abruptly, holding up a hand to signal Anya to halt. He stood motionless, his head cocked to one side, listening intently. Anya held her breath, straining her ears, trying to discern what Elias had heard. At first, there was only silence, the oppressive silence of the Gloomhaven night. But then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, she heard it. A low, rhythmic sound, like footsteps, soft and muffled, but definitely footsteps, approaching from the darkness behind them. "We're not alone," Elias murmured, his voice barely audible. "They're behind us, and they're getting closer." He turned slowly, scanning the darkness behind them, his hand reaching inside his coat, presumably for a weapon. Anya tensed, her hand gripping the utility knife in her pocket, her heart pounding in her chest. They were cornered, trapped in the darkness of the old docks, hunted by unseen pursuers who were closing in on them. The feeling of being watched had solidified into a tangible threat, a silent promise of violence lurking in the shadows. "We need to move," Anya whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "We can't let them corner us here." Elias nodded, his gaze sharp, calculating. "Right, we need to find cover, somewhere to lay a trap, turn the tables on them." He glanced around, his headlamp beam sweeping across the darkened buildings. "That alleyway," he said, pointing to a narrow opening between two warehouses, shrouded in deep shadow. "It's our best chance, come on." They moved quickly but silently, darting into the alleyway, plunging into even deeper darkness. The alley was narrow, claustrophobic, the walls closing in on them, the air thick with the stench of decay and dampness. Elias led the way, moving with a practiced stealth, his senses on high alert, his hand still inside his coat. Anya followed close behind, her headlamp beam cutting a narrow path through the gloom, her utility knife clutched tightly in her hand, her heart pounding in her chest. They were running into a trap, but it was their trap, a desperate gamble to escape their pursuers and regain the initiative. They moved deeper into the alley, their footsteps echoing in the narrow space, the darkness pressing in on them, the silence broken only by their ragged breaths and the distant, approaching footsteps of their pursuers. Elias stopped abruptly, holding up a hand to signal Anya to halt. He pointed to a darkened doorway, recessed into the wall of one of the warehouses, shrouded in shadow. "Here," he whispered. "Inside, quickly." They slipped into the doorway, finding themselves in a small, dark alcove, barely large enough for two people. Elias pressed himself against the wall, motioning Anya to do the same, his finger to his lips, signaling silence. They stood motionless, holding their breath, listening intently, the darkness pressing in on them, the silence amplifying their fear. The approaching footsteps grew louder, closer, echoing in the alleyway, the pursuers closing in on their hiding place. Anya could hear their voices now, low, guttural whispers, indistinct but menacing, carried on the still night air. Syndicate voices, she recognized the harsh, guttural tones, the clipped cadence, the language of the Gloomhaven underworld. They were close, very close, searching for them, hunting them in the darkness. A wave of cold dread washed over Anya, a chilling certainty that their gamble might have failed, that they had walked into a trap of their own making. The footsteps stopped just outside the alleyway entrance. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. Anya could hear them talking now, their words still indistinct, but their tone unmistakable, predatory, confident, certain of their prey. They knew they were here, they knew they were trapped, they were just waiting to close the net. Elias shifted slightly beside her, his hand still inside his coat, his breathing shallow, his gaze fixed on the alleyway entrance, his expression grim, determined. He was ready to fight, to defend them, to face whatever was coming out of the darkness. But Anya knew, with a chilling certainty, that they were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a desperate situation with no easy escape. Suddenly a beam of light cut through the darkness of the alleyway, a harsh, blinding beam that swept across the walls, illuminating the damp brick and the grime-covered windows. A voice, loud and harsh, echoed in the alleyway, shattering the silence, a voice that dripped with menace and authority. "We know you're in there, Thorn," the voice boomed, the words echoing off the warehouse walls. "Come out now, and bring the girl with you. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Elias stiffened beside Anya, his jaw clenching, his eyes narrowing with anger and defiance. "They know me," he murmured, his voice low, grim. "Syndicate, and they know who I am." He glanced at Anya, his gaze hardening. "Looks like we're out of options, Anya. Time to face the music." He stepped out of the alcove, moving towards the alleyway entrance, his hand still concealed inside his coat. Anya followed close behind, her utility knife gripped tightly in her hand, her heart pounding in her chest, ready for whatever confrontation was about to unfold. They emerged from the alleyway into the street, the harsh beam of light blinding them for a moment, disorienting them in the darkness. As their eyes adjusted, they could see them, three figures, hulking and menacing, standing in the street, blocking their escape. They were syndicate thugs, clad in dark clothing, their faces obscured by shadows and balaclavas, their eyes glinting in the harsh light of their flashlights. The leader, the one who had spoken, stepped forward, his flashlight beam fixed on Ilya's, his voice dripping with contempt. "Ilya's Thorn," he sneered, his voice harsh, guttural. "Always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Thought you'd learned your lesson by now. Guess some dogs just can't be taught." He gestured towards Anya with his flashlight beam. "And who's this little stray you've picked up? Another one of your lost causes?" "She's with me," Ilya said, his voice firm, unwavering, despite the odds stacked against them. He stood tall, defiant, facing down the syndicate thugs, his hand still concealed inside his coat, a silent promise of resistance in his stance. "And we're not going anywhere with you." The syndicate leader chuckled, a harsh, humorless sound. "You're in no position to be making demands, Thorn. You and your little friend are surrounded. Just give us what we want and maybe we'll let you walk away." "Maybe," he paused, his voice turning menacing. "But if you try anything funny, well, let's just say Gloomhaven's a dark city, and things can disappear here without anyone ever noticing." He gestured to his companions, and the other two thugs moved forward, flanking Ilya's and Anya, cutting off any chance of escape. They were trapped, surrounded, facing a dangerous confrontation with the Shadow Syndicate, their investigation into the Umbra suddenly taking a perilous turn. "What do you want?" Ilya's asked, his voice calm, controlled, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knew they were in a desperate situation, but he refused to show fear, refused to back down in the face of syndicate intimidation. He needed to buy time to assess their options, to find a way out of this trap. "You know what we want, Thorn," the syndicate leader sneered. "You've been poking around, asking questions, sniffing where you shouldn't, about the blackout, about things you don't understand." He paused, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "We know you've been asking about the Umbra." Anya's breath hitched in her throat. They knew. The syndicate knew about their investigation, they knew about the Umbra, they knew about everything. Their search for answers had not gone unnoticed. It had drawn the attention of the city's most dangerous criminal organization, and now they were facing the consequences. The feeling of being watched was no longer just a feeling. It was a chilling reality, a confirmation that the syndicate was aware of their every move, their every whisper, their every question. "We're just trying to understand what's happening in the city," Ilya said, his voice carefully neutral. "The blackout, the disappearances, people are scared, people are worried. We're just trying to find some answers, some reassurance." Syndicate leader laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Reassurance? In Gloomhaven, you're a fool if you think that's what this city needs. People need to be controlled, Thorn. They need to be kept in the dark, and that's exactly what we're doing. The blackout, it's an opportunity for us to consolidate our power, to expand our reach, to take control of this city once and for all." He paused, his voice turning cold, menacing. "And you, Thorn, and your little friend, you're interfering with our plans. You're asking questions you shouldn't be asking, uncovering things you shouldn't be uncovering. And that's something we can't allow." "So what are you going to do?" Ilya's asked, his voice steady, defiant. "Silence us, make us disappear. Is that how the syndicate operates now? By silencing anyone who asks questions, anyone who challenges your power?" "Sometimes, Thorn," the syndicate leader said, his voice low, menacing. "Sometimes silence is the only answer. And tonight, you and your little friend are going to learn the meaning of silence." He gestured to his companions, and they moved closer, their flashlights casting harsh shadows on their faces, their eyes glinting with menace. The confrontation was escalating, the threat of violence hanging heavy in the air, the Gloomhaven darkness closing in around them, trapping them in a deadly game of cat and mouse with the Shadow Syndicate. Ilya's hand flashed out from inside his coat, not with a gun, as Anya might have expected, but with a blinding spray of pepper spray. He targeted the leader, catching him full in the face, the thug roaring in pain and surprise, stumbling back, his hands flying to his eyes. At the same time, Ilya shoved Anya forward, yelling, "Run! Now!" Anya didn't hesitate. She reacted instantly, adrenaline surging through her veins, propelling her forward. She sprinted past the blinded syndicate leader, dodging the flailing arms of his companions, her headlamp beam bouncing wildly, illuminating the darkened street ahead. Elias was right behind her, his footsteps pounding on the pavement, the sounds of chaos erupting behind them, shouts of pain, curses, the thud of bodies colliding in the darkness. They had broken free, for now, but the syndicate thugs were in pursuit, their anger and their determination fueled by the surprise attack. They ran blindly, their only goal to escape, to put distance between themselves and their pursuers. They weaved through the darkened streets of the old docks, their headlamp beams cutting through the gloom, their breath coming in ragged gasps, their lungs burning. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of pursuit, heavy footsteps pounding on the pavement, shouts echoing in the darkness, the unmistakable sound of syndicate thugs closing in on their prey. The chase was on, a desperate flight through the labyrinthine streets of Gloomhaven's underbelly, with the Shadow Syndicate hot on their heels, determined to silence them, to stop their investigation, to protect their secrets in the darkness. The smooth story transition is now set. Anya and Elias have escaped the initial syndicate confrontation, but they are now being actively hunted, forcing them to reassess their strategy and find a safer way to continue their investigation into the Umbra and the Shadow Syndicate's involvement. They sprinted through the labyrinthine alleys of the old docks, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them, a constant reminder of the danger they were in. Anya's lungs burned, her legs ached, but adrenaline kept her moving, fear lending her speed and a desperate urgency. Elias, despite his age and weariness, kept pace, his movements surprisingly agile, his years of navigating Gloomhaven's underbelly serving them well. They twisted and turned through narrow passages, ducked under low archways, and vaulted over piles of debris, trying to lose their pursuers in the darkness and confusion of the old docks. The sounds of the syndicate thugs chasing them were relentless, echoing off the brick walls and dilapidated warehouses, growing closer, then fading slightly, then growing closer again. Anya could hear their harsh shouts, their guttural curses, their heavy footsteps pounding on the pavement, a constant threat looming behind them in the darkness. She glanced over her shoulder, her headlamp beam cutting through the gloom, catching fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures in the distance, their flashlights bobbing and weaving as they navigated the maze of alleys. They were gaining on them, slowly but surely, their persistence unwavering, their determination to capture them palpable in the darkness. "This way," Elias gasped, veering sharply into a narrow passage, barely wider than their shoulders. Anya followed him, squeezing through the tight space, the rough brick scraping against her jacket. The passage opened into a small enclosed courtyard surrounded by towering warehouses, the darkness even more profound here, the air thick with the stench of stagnant water and decay. It seemed like a dead end, a trap, but Elias wasn't stopping. He was scanning the courtyard, his gaze sharp, searching for an escape route. "Over there," he hissed, pointing to a rickety wooden staircase clinging precariously to the side of one of the warehouses, leading up into the darkness above. Up quickly. Without hesitation, they scrambled towards the staircase, the wood groaning and creaking under their weight, threatening to collapse with every step. They climbed quickly, their hands gripping the rotting railing, their feet slipping on the damp, moss-covered steps. The staircase seemed endless, spiraling upwards into the darkness, a precarious climb into the unknown. Behind them, they could hear the syndicate thugs entering the courtyard, their voices echoing in the enclosed space, their flashlights sweeping across the ground, searching for their trail. They were close, very close, their pursuit relentless, their capture imminent. Anya's heart pounded in her chest, fear gripping her, a chilling certainty that they were running out of time, running out of escape routes. Finally, they reached the top of the staircase, emerging onto a narrow wooden platform, clinging to the side of the warehouse, high above the courtyard below. The platform was rickety and unstable, the wood rotting and decaying, threatening to give way at any moment. It offered a temporary respite, a moment to catch their breath, but it was also exposed, vulnerable, a precarious perch high above the reach of their pursuers. "Stay low," Elias whispered, dropping to a crouch, motioning Anya to do the same. They huddled on the platform, pressed against the warehouse wall, their breath coming in ragged gasps, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. Below them in the courtyard, they could hear the syndicate thugs searching, their voices echoing in the enclosed space, their flashlights sweeping across the ground, getting closer to the base of the staircase. They were trapped, cornered on a precarious wooden platform high above the ground, with no apparent escape route, their pursuers closing in below. "They'll find us," Anya gasped, her voice barely audible. "They'll climb up here, we're trapped." Elias shook his head, his gaze sharp, calculating, scanning their surroundings. "Not yet," he murmured, his voice low, determined. "There's another way, look." He pointed to a narrow wooden walkway extending from the platform across to the roof of the adjacent warehouse, a precarious bridge spanning the gap between the buildings, shrouded in darkness, seemingly leading into nothingness. "That," Anya exclaimed, her voice laced with disbelief. "That's suicide. It'll collapse, we'll fall." Elias shook his head again, his gaze unwavering, his determination absolute. "It's our only chance, Anya. Stay close, move slowly, and trust me." Without waiting for her response, he started moving towards the walkway, his movements cautious but deliberate, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. Anya hesitated for a moment, fear warring with desperation, then followed him, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath held tight in her lungs. The walkway was even more precarious than it looked, the wood rotting and decaying, swaying precariously in the darkness, creaking and groaning under their weight. The gap between the warehouses seemed vast, the darkness below yawning and menacing, promising a long and deadly fall. Anya moved slowly, cautiously, her hand gripping the rotting railing, her eyes fixed on Elias's back, trusting him to lead them through this perilous crossing, trusting him to guide them to safety. The syndicate thugs were still searching below, their voices growing louder, their footsteps approaching the base of the staircase, their pursuit relentless, their capture imminent. The walkway swayed and creaked, the darkness pressed in on them, the threat of falling, the threat of capture, the threat of the Umbra, all converging on them, a terrifying vortex of danger and desperation. They reached the other side, collapsing onto the relatively solid surface of the warehouse roof, their bodies trembling, their breath coming in ragged gasps, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had made it, they had crossed the precarious walkway, they had escaped for now from the immediate threat of the syndicate thugs. But they were still in the old docks, still in syndicate territory, still hunted, still searching for answers in the darkness of Gloomhaven. "We need to get out of here," Elias gasped, his voice hoarse, his chest heaving. "The old docks, it's too dangerous. They know we're here, they'll be looking for us everywhere." Anya nodded, agreeing wholeheartedly. The old docks, once a place of refuge, had become a hunting ground, a trap, a dangerous labyrinth where the Shadow Syndicate reigned supreme. They needed to find somewhere safe, somewhere hidden, somewhere beyond the reach of their pursuers. "The Order," Anya said, the name surfacing in her mind, a desperate gamble, a long shot, but perhaps their only hope. "The Order of the Everlight, they're supposed to be against the darkness. Maybe they can help us, maybe they know something about the Umbra." Elias hesitated, his brow furrowed in thought. "The Order, they're fanatics, Anya, religious zealots. They're probably just as dangerous as the Syndicate in their own way." "Maybe," Anya conceded, "but they're not Syndicate, and they claim to fight the darkness. Maybe they have information, maybe they have resources, maybe they can offer us sanctuary. It's better than nothing. And the outline mentioned they have ancient knowledge about the Umbra." Elias considered her words, his gaze fixed on the darkened cityscape stretching out before them. The Order of the Everlight, a dwindling religious sect, worshipping the sun in a city perpetually shrouded in twilight, a strange and unlikely refuge, but perhaps their only option. "All right," he said finally, his voice resigned. "The Order it is, but we need to be careful. They're not to be trusted blindly. We go to them for information, for help, but we keep our guard up." "Understand," Anya nodded, understanding perfectly. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford in Gloomhaven, especially not now, hunted by the Syndicate, pursued by the Umbra, seeking refuge with a religious order shrouded in mystery and fanaticism. They descended from the warehouse roof, finding a less precarious staircase on the other side, leading down into a different part of the old docks, a slightly less dilapidated, slightly less dangerous section of the district. They moved quickly, cautiously, sticking to the shadows, their headlamp beams dimmed, their senses on high alert. They needed to reach the Order's sanctuary, their temple, their hidden fortress of light in the heart of Gloomhaven's darkness. But they didn't know where it was, they didn't know how to find it. They only had the vague rumors and whispers that circulated in the city's underbelly, whispers of a hidden temple, a sanctuary of light, a refuge for those who sought solace from the Gloomhaven gloom. "Do you know where to find them?" Anya asked, her voice low, uncertain. "The Order's temple, is it even real or just a myth?" Elias shook his head, his expression grim. "It's real," he said. "I know it is. I've heard whispers, rumors. It's supposed to be hidden somewhere in the older districts, the forgotten parts of the city. But no one knows exactly where. They keep it secret, hidden from the outside world, protected from the darkness." He paused, thinking. "But there are places. Places where people seek them out, places where they leave messages, places where they might be found. The old cathedrals, the forgotten churches, the remnants of Gloomhaven's past faith. We need to start there. Search for signs, for clues, for any indication of the Order's presence." They began their search, venturing into the older districts of Gloomhaven, the crumbling remnants of a bygone era, the forgotten corners of the city where history lingered in the shadows. They searched through ruined churches, abandoned cathedrals, dilapidated monasteries, their headlamp beams cutting through the dust and decay, searching for any sign of the Order of the Everlight. The old districts were eerily silent, even more deserted than the old docks, the darkness here deeper, more oppressive, the air thick with the scent of dust and forgotten prayers. They found nothing, only empty ruins, crumbling walls, and the lingering echoes of a faith long lost to the Gloomhaven gloom. Despair began to creep in, a chilling realization that their desperate gamble might be failing, that the Order of the Everlight might be nothing more than a myth, a forgotten dream in the heart of the city's darkness. But then in a small, forgotten chapel, tucked away in a narrow alleyway, almost hidden by overgrown vines and crumbling stonework, Anya noticed something. A faint symbol etched into the stone above the doorway, almost invisible in the dim light of her headlamp. It was a stylized sun, a radiant circle with rays emanating outwards, a symbol of light in the heart of darkness, a symbol of the Order of the Everlight. Anya gasped, pointing to the symbol, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Elias, look, the symbol, it's here." Elias rushed to her side, his gaze fixed on the etched sun, his expression shifting from weary despair to cautious hope. "The Order," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "They're here, this is it." They cautiously approached the chapel doorway, their hearts pounding with anticipation and trepidation. The door was heavy, wooden, studded with iron, ancient and imposing, shrouded in shadow. Anya hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for the heavy iron ring that served as a handle. What awaited them behind that door? Refuge, knowledge, or just another trap, another dead end in the labyrinth of Gloomhaven's darkness? She didn't know, but she knew they had no other choice. They had to take the risk. They had to seek help from the Order of the Everlight. They had to hope that light could be found even in the deepest darkness of Gloomhaven. Taking a deep breath, Anya pulled the heavy iron ring, the door creaking open with a slow, groaning sound, revealing a dimly lit interior, a faint glow emanating from within, a fragile beacon of light in the oppressive Gloomhaven darkness. They stepped inside, leaving the shadows of the alleyway behind, venturing into the unknown sanctuary of the Order of the Everlight, their quest for answers, their desperate search for refuge, leading them into the heart of a mystery far deeper and more ancient than they could have ever imagined. The smooth story transition is now set. Anya and Elias enter the sanctuary of the Order of the Everlight, ready to seek refuge and knowledge, unaware of the secrets and revelations that await them within. The heavy wooden door groaned open, revealing a dimly lit interior that felt strangely warm and still compared to the cold, smog-laden air of Gloomhaven outside. A soft, golden light emanated from within, a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness that reigned throughout the city, hinting at a sanctuary painstakingly carved out against the all-consuming gloom. Anya hesitated for a moment on the threshold, her senses on high alert, her utility knife still clutched in her hand. Elias, however, stepped forward with a slightly more confident stride, his weariness seemingly lessened by the sight of this unexpected beacon of hope. The chapel interior was small, intimate, and strikingly simple. Rough-hewn stone walls, dimly illuminated by flickering oil lamps placed in niches, enclosed a space devoid of ostentation. There were no elaborate decorations, no gilded statues, no stained glass windows, only bare stone, worn wooden pews, and an altar at the far end, bathed in a slightly brighter golden light. The air inside was thick with the scent of incense, beeswax, and something else, something subtly earthy and ancient that Anya couldn't quite place. It was a smell of old rituals, of unwavering faith, a scent that spoke of a time before Gloomhaven's decay, a time when light might have held more sway. Several figures were present in the chapel, kneeling in silent prayer in the pews, their faces turned towards the altar. They were clad in simple, unbleached robes, their heads covered with hoods that obscured their features, adding to the air of mystery and quiet devotion that permeated the space. The golden light at the altar seemed to emanate from a large, intricately carved sun symbol, positioned above a simple wooden table. It was a focal point, a source of warmth and light in the heart of the shadowed chapel, drawing the eye and seemingly radiating a palpable sense of peace. As Anya and Elias stepped further inside, their footsteps echoing softly on the stone floor, one of the figures in the pews rose and turned towards them. It was a woman taller than the others, her robes flowing around her, her face still hidden within the depths of her hood, but her posture radiating an air of quiet authority. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, approaching them with an almost ethereal quality. "Welcome, travelers," she said, her voice soft but clear, resonating with a gentle warmth that was unexpected and strangely comforting. "You seek sanctuary in the Everlight. What brings you to our humble chapel in these dark times?" Her voice held a hint of an accent Anya couldn't quite place, something old and almost melodic, adding to the otherworldly feeling of the chapel and its inhabitants. Elias stepped forward, his posture straightening, his voice losing some of its usual rasp. "We are seekers," he said, his tone respectful but direct. "Seekers of knowledge, seekers of truth. We have heard whispers of the Order of the Everlight, of your ancient wisdom, of your fight against the darkness. We believe you may have answers to questions that plague our city, questions about the blackout, about the shadows that stir in the gloom." The woman paused for a moment, her hooded gaze seemingly assessing them, scrutinizing their intentions. The silence in the chapel deepened, the only sound the soft crackling of the oil lamps and the distant murmur of the Gloomhaven night outside. Then she nodded slowly, a subtle movement within the depths of her hood. "The Everlight welcomes all who seek truth," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But truth is a dangerous path in these times, a path fraught with shadows and peril. Tell me, seekers, what is it you seek? What shadows trouble your hearts?" Anya stepped forward this time, her cynicism momentarily subdued by the atmosphere of the chapel and the woman's calm demeanor. She pulled one of the dead phones from her backpack, the sleek, expensive model still glowing with its eerie green message. She held it out to the woman, the faint light of the screen illuminating her face, highlighting the weariness and fear etched in her features. "This," she said, her voice low, urgent. "This message. Beware the Umbra, it hungers. We found it on hundreds of dead phones, scattered throughout the city. We believe it's a warning, a sign of something ancient and dangerous awakening in the darkness. We believe the Order of the Everlight may know something about this Umbra." The woman took the phone from Anya, her touch surprisingly gentle, her hooded gaze fixed on the glowing screen. She held it for a long moment, studying the cryptic message, her silence stretching out, adding to the tension in the small chapel. Then she looked up, her gaze meeting Anya's, though Anya still couldn't discern her features beneath the hood. "The Umbra," she murmured, the word resonating with a strange weight in her voice, a hint of ancient fear, a whisper of forgotten lore. "Yes," she said, her voice barely audible. "We know of the Umbra. It is an ancient shadow, a hunger born of the void, a presence that has haunted Gloomhaven since its very beginnings." A wave of relief washed over Anya, mixed with a growing sense of unease. They had found someone who understood, someone who knew about the Umbra, someone who might be able to help them. But the woman's words also carried a chilling weight, a confirmation that their fears were real, that the danger they faced was ancient and profound. "Tell us," Anya urged, her voice trembling slightly. "Tell us everything you know about the Umbra. What is it? What does it hunger for? And how can we stop it?" The woman nodded slowly, her gaze distant, as if looking into the shadows of the past, into the depths of forgotten knowledge. "The Umbra," she repeated, her voice low, almost reverent. "It is the shadow that Gloomhaven has always carried within it, the darkness that feeds on despair, on fear, on the absence of light. It is an entity born of the void before creation, a hunger that predates time itself. It is drawn to places of darkness, to cities like Gloomhaven, where the light is weak and the shadows are strong." She paused, her gaze returning to Anya and Elias, her voice taking on a more somber tone. "In times of great darkness, in times of blackout, the Umbra stirs. It awakens from its slumber, its hunger intensifying, its influence growing stronger. It feeds on the city's fear, on the despair of its people, on the absence of the Everlight." "The Everlight," Elias interjected, his brow furrowed. "The sun, You believe the sun can stop this, Umbra? The woman nodded, her gaze turning towards the altar, towards the glowing sun symbol. The Everlight is not merely the sun in the sky, Seeker, she said, her voice taking on a more didactic tone. It is the source of all light, all life, all hope. It is the force that pushes back against the void, against the shadows, against the Umbra's hunger. In Gloomhaven, where the physical sun is obscured, the Everlight exists within the hearts of those who believe, within the sanctuaries we create, within the symbols we hold sacred. She gestured to the chapel around them, to the flickering oil lamps, to the golden glow of the altar. This chapel, this sanctuary, it is a beacon of the Everlight in the darkness of Gloomhaven. It is a place where we can find strength, where we can resist the Umbra's influence, where we can prepare for the battles to come. Battles? Anya questioned, her cynicism momentarily returning. What kind of battles? Are we talking about fighting shadows, fighting hunger? The woman turned her gaze back to Anya, her hooded face unreadable, her voice regaining its gentle warmth, but now laced with a hint of warning. The battles against the Umbra are not fought with weapons of steel and fire, Seeker, she said. They are fought with faith, with hope, with the light of the Everlight within your own heart. They are battles against despair, against fear, against the darkness that seeks to consume all. And they are battles that are fought in the shadows, in the hidden places of Gloomhaven, in the forgotten corners of the city where the Umbra's influence is strongest. She paused, her gaze softening slightly, a hint of compassion entering her voice. But you are not alone in this fight, Seekers. The Everlight stands with you as it has stood against the Umbra for generations. We have knowledge, we have rituals, we have defenses against the shadows. And we are willing to share them with those who seek truth and stand against the darkness. We are willing to learn, Elias said, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering. We are willing to fight. Tell us what we need to do. Tell us how we can help stop the Umbra's hunger before it consumes Gloomhaven completely. The woman nodded slowly, a subtle smile seeming to touch her lips beneath the hood. Then you have come to the right place, Seekers, she said. The path ahead is long and perilous, but the Everlight will guide your steps. First, you must understand the Umbra, its nature, its weaknesses. Then you must prepare yourselves for the battles to come. And then we will venture into the shadows, into the heart of the darkness, to confront the Umbra and protect Gloomhaven from its ancient hunger. She turned to the other figures kneeling in the pews, raising her hands in a gesture of silent command. The figures rose, their movements synchronized, their hooded faces turning towards Anya and Elias, their presence filling the small chapel, a silent promise of support, a gathering of forces against the encroaching darkness. The woman turned back to Anya and Elias, her voice filled with a newfound purpose, a quiet determination. Come, she said, let us begin. Let us delve into the ancient lore of the Everlight and learn the secrets of the Umbra, the shadow that hungers in the Gloomhaven night. She gestured towards a side door, leading deeper into the chapel complex, into the hidden heart of the Order of the Everlight, into the unknown depths of their ancient knowledge and their long-standing battle against the shadows. Anya and Elias followed her, stepping through the doorway, leaving the simple chapel behind, venturing deeper into the sanctuary, ready to embrace the path of the Everlight, ready to confront the Umbra, ready to fight for the light in the heart of Gloomhaven's perpetual twilight. The smooth story transition is now set. Anya and Elias are about to delve deeper into the Order's sanctuary and learn more about the Umbra and the Everlight's fight against it, setting the stage for the next phase of their investigation and their preparation for confronting the ancient entity. They followed the hooded woman through the side door, stepping from the simple chapel into a narrow, dimly lit corridor. The air here was even warmer and heavier, thick with the scent of incense and a deeper, more pervasive earthy aroma. The stone walls were rougher, older, hinting at the ancient foundations of the sanctuary hidden beneath the unassuming chapel. Flickering oil lamps, spaced further apart than in the chapel, cast long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eye, making the corridor seem to stretch on endlessly into the darkness. The hooded figures who had risen from the pews followed them in silence, their footsteps muffled on the stone floor, their presence a constant, watchful escort. Anya felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief at finding a potential ally, a source of information, a sanctuary from the Syndicate's pursuit and the city's encroaching darkness. Apprehension at the unknown nature of the Order, their fanaticism, their hidden motives, the secrets that lay within these ancient walls. The corridor twisted and turned, descending gently downwards, as if they were burrowing deeper into the earth, further away from the smog-choked surface of Gloomhaven and deeper into the heart of the Order's mysteries. The silence was broken only by the soft rustling of robes, the occasional creak of ancient stone, and the distant, almost imperceptible murmur of chanting growing fainter, and then louder as the corridor wound its way through the depths of the sanctuary. The hooded woman led them to a larger chamber, opening off the corridor through a low, arched doorway. This chamber was also dimly lit, but the light here was different, softer, more diffused, emanating not from oil lamps but from rows of candles flickering in wall sconces, casting a warm, golden glow that bathed the room in a gentle, almost ethereal light. The chamber was a library, or at least resembled one. Tall shelves lined the walls, reaching up into the shadows of the high ceiling, packed with scrolls, bound books of varying sizes and ages, and strange, unidentifiable objects wrapped in cloth and tied with twine. The air here was thick with the scent of old paper, parchment, and beeswax, a comforting, scholarly aroma that contrasted sharply with the oppressive smells of the outside world. In the center of the library, a large wooden table stood surrounded by low stools, covered with more scrolls and books, and illuminated by several tall candlesticks. Two more hooded figures were seated at the table, poring over ancient texts, their faces hidden within their hoods, their movements slow and deliberate. As Anya, Elias, and their escort entered, the two figures looked up, their hooded gazes turning towards them, their silence expectant. The hooded woman who had led them here gestured to the table. "Here, seekers," she said, her voice gentle. "Here we keep the lore of the Everlight, the knowledge passed down through generations, the wisdom gleaned from centuries of vigilance against the shadows. Here you will find answers to your questions if you are willing to seek them." She turned to the two figures at the table. "Sisters, these are seekers who have come to us with questions about the Umbra, the shadow that stirs in Gloomhaven. Share with them the lore, guide them to the knowledge they seek. I must return to my vigil." With a slight nod to Anya and Elias, she turned and left the library, her hooded figure disappearing back into the dimly lit corridor, leaving them in the care of the two silent sisters. The two hooded figures at the table rose slowly, their movements graceful and deliberate. One was taller, more slender, the other shorter, more stocky, but both were clad in the same simple robes, their faces hidden within the depths of their hoods. The taller sister stepped forward, her voice soft but clear, echoing the gentle warmth of the woman who had greeted them. "Welcome, seekers," she said. "I am Sister Agnes, and this is Sister Martha. We are keepers of the lore, guardians of the Everlight's wisdom. You seek knowledge of the Umbra. Tell us what you already know, and we will guide you through the paths of understanding." Elias stepped forward, his voice respectful but direct. "We know very little," he admitted. "Only the cryptic message, beware the Umbra it hungers, and the feeling of a growing darkness in the city, a sense of ancient hunger awakened by the blackout. We believe the Umbra is connected to disappearances, to fear, to the darkness itself. We seek to understand its nature, its origins, its weaknesses, and how to stop it before it consumes Gloomhaven." Sister Agnes nodded slowly, her hooded gaze thoughtful. "You speak truly, seekers," she said. "The Umbra is indeed a hunger, a shadow, an ancient entity that feeds on the darkness of Gloomhaven. It is a creature of the void, born before the Everlight, a primal force of chaos and consumption. It has always been present in Gloomhaven, lurking beneath the surface, drawn to the city's perpetual twilight, its smog-choked skis, its undercurrent of despair. But in times of great darkness, like this blackout, its power grows, its hunger intensifies, its influence spreads." "How did it come to be?" Anya asked, her voice filled with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Where does it come from? Is it alive?" Sister Martha, the shorter, stockier sister, spoke for the first time, her voice deeper, more resonant than Sister Agnes's, carrying a hint of ancient authority. "The Umbra is not alive as you understand it, seeker," she said. "It is not a creature of flesh and blood, but a force, an entity of pure shadow, born from the absence of light. It is said to have emerged from the void before creation, a fragment of the primordial darkness that existed before the Everlight brought order and light to the cosmos. It is drawn to places where the Everlight's influence is weak, where darkness reigns, where despair and fear fester. Gloomhaven, with its perpetual twilight, its smog-choked skis, its history of corruption and decay, is a fertile ground for the Umbra's hunger. And the disappearances? Elias asked, his voice sharp, his detective instincts kicking in. Are they connected to the Umbra? Are people being taken by this shadow entity? Sister Agnes nodded, her gaze somber. It is said that the Umbra feeds not only on the city's fear and despair, but also on its life force, its essence. In times of great darkness, when its hunger is strongest, it may manifest physically, reaching out from the shadows to claim victims, to consume their life force, to add to its own growing power. The disappearances, they are a sign of the Umbra's awakening, a manifestation of its hunger. Manifest physically? Anya questioned, her brow furrowed. You mean it can take a form like the shadowy figure we encountered? Sister Martha nodded slowly, her deeper voice echoing in the library. In times of great darkness, the Umbra can coalesce, taking on a physical form, a creature of shadow and hunger, a manifestation of its ancient void. The form it takes is often amorphous, indistinct, a shifting mass of darkness, but sometimes it may mimic humanoid shapes, preying on human fears and vulnerabilities. The shadowy figure you encountered, it may have been a manifestation of the Umbra, a herald of its growing power. A chill ran down Anya's spine, the memory of the shadowy figure's glowing green eyes, its guttural growl, its unnatural movements, becoming even more terrifying in light of the sister's words. The Umbra wasn't just a feeling, a presence, it was a real, tangible threat, capable of manifesting physically, capable of hunting, capable of consuming. How do we fight it? Elias asked, his voice urgent. How do we stop it from feeding, from growing stronger, from consuming Gloomhaven? Sister Agnes gestured to the shelves around them, filled with ancient texts and scrolls. The lore of the Everlight holds the answers, Seeker, she said. Generations of our order have studied the Umbra, have learned its weaknesses, have developed rituals and defenses against its influence. We have texts that describe its nature, its origins, its manifestations. We have rituals to weaken its power, to ward off its presence, to banish it back into the void from whence it came. She walked towards one of the shelves, her robes rustling softly, reaching up to a high shelf and carefully taking down a large, leather-bound volume, its pages yellowed with age, its cover worn and cracked. She brought it back to the table and placed it before Anya and Elias, opening it to a page filled with intricate symbols and ancient script. This is the Codex Umbra, the most comprehensive text in our possession regarding the shadow entity, she said, her voice reverent. It contains centuries of accumulated knowledge, observations, rituals, and warnings concerning the Umbra. Within these pages, you may find the answers you seek. Anya and Elias leaned closer, peering at the ancient text, the unfamiliar symbols and script, the faded illustrations depicting shadowy figures and swirling darkness. The Codex Umbra, a repository of ancient lore, a guide to battling an entity of pure shadow, a potential weapon in their fight to save Gloomhaven from the encroaching darkness. The weight of the task ahead settled upon them, heavy and daunting, but now they were no longer alone, no longer without resources, no longer facing the Umbra unarmed. They had found the Order of the Everlight, a sanctuary in the darkness, a source of knowledge, and perhaps a beacon of hope in the heart of Gloomhaven's perpetual twilight. Where do we begin? Anya asked, her voice determined, her fear slowly giving way to a sense of purpose. How do we decipher this codex? How do we learn what we need to know to fight the Umbra? Sister Martha stepped forward, placing her hand on the Codex Umbra, her touch almost reverent. We will guide you, seekers, she said, her deep voice firm and reassuring. We will share our knowledge, teach you the rituals, show you the paths of the Everlight, but be warned, the path is not easy. The Umbra is a powerful entity, ancient and cunning. The knowledge within this codex is potent, but also dangerous. It must be wielded with respect, with caution, with the light of the Everlight guiding your steps. She looked at Anya and Elias, her hooded gaze intense, searching. Are you willing to undertake this path, seekers? Are you willing to face the shadows, to confront the Umbra, to fight for the light of Gloomhaven? Anya and Elias exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them, a shared understanding of the danger, the responsibility, the desperate need for action. Elias nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering, his weariness replaced by a grim determination. Anya took a deep breath, her cynicism fading, replaced by a flicker of hope, a spark of resolve. We are, Anya said, her voice firm, her gaze meeting Sister Martha's. We are willing to fight for Gloomhaven. We are willing to face the Umbra. Guide us, sisters. show us the path of the ever-light." Sister Agnes and Sister Martha exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then Sister Agnes smiled, a subtle movement beneath her hood, a hint of warmth in her gentle voice. "Then let us begin," she said. "Let us delve into the Codex Umbra and learn the secrets of the shadow that hungers in the Gloomhaven night." She gestured to the Codex, inviting Anya and Elias to join them at the table, to begin their journey into the ancient lore of the Everlight, their desperate quest to understand and confront the Umbra, the ancient entity that threatened to consume their city in darkness. The soft glow of the candles, the scent of incense and old parchment, the hushed whispers of ancient wisdom, filled the library, a sanctuary of light and knowledge, a fragile beacon of hope in the encroaching Gloomhaven gloom, ready to arm Anya and Elias for the battles to come, the battles against the shadows, the battles against the Umbra, the battles for the soul of their city. The smooth story transition was now set. Anya and Elias are about to begin studying the Codex Umbra with the sisters, embarking on a journey of learning and preparation, setting the stage for their confrontation with the Umbra and the next phase of their investigation into its origins and weaknesses. Sister Agnes gestured towards the Codex Umbra, its ancient leather cover worn smooth by countless hands, its pages whispering secrets in the flickering candlelight. Anya and Elias drew closer, their eyes drawn to the open page, a tapestry of faded ink and strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light. The script was unlike anything Anya had ever seen, a language of sharp angles and flowing curves, interspersed with diagrams of celestial bodies and shadowy figures that hinted at both cosmic vastness and terrestrial dread. Sister Agnes began to speak, her gentle voice a guide through the labyrinthine text. "The Codex Umbra is not a book to be read lightly," she cautioned, her finger tracing a line of the ancient script. "It is a living record, imbued with the echoes of countless encounters with the Umbra, a repository of knowledge bought with sacrifice and vigilance. Its pages hold both wisdom and warning." Sister Martha added, her deeper voice resonating with ancient authority. "For generations, the Order of the Everlight has studied the Umbra, seeking to understand its nature, to decipher its motives, to find ways to protect Gloomhaven from its insatiable hunger. The Codex is the culmination of that effort, a testament to our enduring struggle against the shadows." They began to decipher the Codex, guided by the sisters' patient explanations. Sister Agnes, with her gentle demeanor, focused on the historical context, tracing the origins of the Umbra legend back to Gloomhaven's earliest days, to whispered tales of a primordial darkness that predated the city itself. She spoke of ancient texts, of forgotten rituals, of early attempts to ward off the entity, some successful, many tragically failed. Gloomhaven was not always shrouded in twilight, Sister Agnes explained, her finger pointing to a faded illustration in the Codex depicting a sun-drenched city bathed in golden light, a stark contrast to the smog-choked metropolis Anya knew. In its earliest days, the sun shone brightly upon this land, but even then the Umbra lurked beneath the surface, a shadow in the soul of the world, drawn to places of human suffering and despair. Sister Martha, with her deeper voice and more direct approach, focused on the practical aspects of combating the Umbra, on the rituals and defenses detailed within the Codex. She pointed out symbols of the Everlight, diagrams of protective circles, and descriptions of ancient chants and incantations designed to repel the shadow entity. "The Umbra is repelled by light, by purity, by unwavering faith," Sister Martha explained, her finger tracing a complex symbol of radiant sun rays. "These symbols, these rituals, they are conduits of the Everlight, channels through which its power can flow, pushing back against the darkness, weakening the Umbra's influence." Anya listened intently, her initial cynicism slowly melting away, replaced by a growing fascination and a dawning sense of responsibility. The Codex Umbra was not just a book, it was a history lesson, a survival guide, a weapon against an ancient enemy. The sisters' words were not just religious pronouncements, they were practical instructions, born from generations of struggle and hard-won knowledge. Elias, ever the pragmatist, focused on the weaknesses of the Umbra as described in the Codex. He questioned the sisters closely, probing for details, seeking to understand the entity's vulnerabilities, its limitations. He was less interested in the spiritual aspects of the Everlight and more concerned with the practicalities of combating a shadowy enemy. The Codex speaks of the Umbra's hunger for despair and fear, Elias noted, pointing to a passage describing the entity's feeding habits. Does that mean we can weaken it by fostering hope, by reducing fear? Sister Agnes nodded, her gentle gaze meeting Elias. Indeed, Seeker. The Umbra thrives in an atmosphere of negativity, of hopelessness. Acts of courage, acts of compassion, acts of faith, they are like sparks of light in the darkness, diminishing the shadows, weakening the Umbra's hold. Sister Martha added, but more direct methods are also necessary. The Codex details rituals of purification, of banishment, of warding. These rituals, when performed correctly, with unwavering faith and a pure heart, can create barriers against the Umbra's influence, can even force it to retreat back into the void. They spent hours poring over the Codex Umbra, the candlelight flickering around them, the library falling silent save for the hushed voices of the sisters and the rustling of ancient pages. Anya and Elias absorbed a torrent of information, a history of Gloomhaven's hidden struggle against the Umbra, a lexicon of rituals and symbols, a guide to fighting an enemy that existed in the shadows and fed on despair. Anya learned about the Umbra's origins, its connection to the primordial void, its susceptibility to light and faith, its ability to manifest physically in times of great darkness. She learned about the Everlight not just as a deity worshipped by the Order, but as a force, a cosmic principle of light and order that stood in opposition to the Umbra's chaos and hunger. She learned about the rituals of purification, designed to cleanse areas tainted by the Umbra's presence, the rituals of warding, designed to create protective barriers against its influence, and the rituals of banishment, designed to force the entity back into the void. Elias focused on the practical applications of this knowledge, seeking to identify the most effective rituals, the most potent symbols, the most reliable defenses against the Umbra. He peppered the sisters with questions about the materials required for the rituals, the precise incantations, the necessary conditions for success. He was building a tactical plan, a strategy to combat the shadow entity, approaching the fight against the Umbra with the same methodical approach he had once applied to solving crimes. As the hours passed, Anya felt a shift within herself. The cynicism that had been her shield for so long began to crack, replaced by a strange mixture of fear and hope. Fear at the enormity of the threat they faced, at the ancient power of the Umbra, at the dangers that lurked in the Gloomhaven darkness. But also hope fueled by the sisters' unwavering faith, by the knowledge contained within the Codex Umbra, by the sense that they were not alone in this fight, that the Everlight, however dimly it burned in Gloomhaven, offered a chance to push back against the encroaching darkness. Elias, too, seemed to be undergoing a transformation. The weariness and despair that had clung to him like a shroud began to lift, replaced by a focused energy, a renewed sense of purpose. The disgraced detective was re-emerging, his sharp mind engaged, his instincts honed, his determination rekindled. The Umbra, the ancient shadow that threatened Gloomhaven, had given him something to fight for, something to redeem himself for, a chance to confront not just the darkness of the city, but the darkness within his own past. As dawn approached, painting the smog-choked sky with faint streaks of gray, Sister Agnes closed the Codex Umbra, its ancient pages whispering secrets back into silence. The candlelight flickered low, the library bathed in a soft, golden glow, the air thick with the scent of old parchment and newfound knowledge. "You have learned much, Seekers," Sister Agnes said, her gentle voice filled with a quiet satisfaction. "But knowledge is only the first step. Now you must prepare yourselves for action. The Umbra will not wait for you to be ready. Its hunger grows stronger with each passing hour, with each deepening shadow in Gloomhaven." Sister Martha nodded, her deeper voice adding weight to Sister Agnes's words. "The Codex Umbra details rituals of protection, rituals of purification. We will teach you these rituals, guide you in their practice. But they require more than just words and gestures. They require faith, focus, and a pure heart. You must prepare yourselves inwardly as well as outwardly." They spent the next few hours in preparation, guided by the sisters' patient instruction. Sister Agnes taught Anya and Elias the basic rituals of warding and purification, simple chants and gestures designed to create a personal shield of everlight, to cleanse areas tainted by the Umbra's presence. Sister Martha instructed them in the use of specific symbols, drawing them in beeswax and charcoal, explaining their significance, their power to channel the Everlight's energy. Anya struggled at first, her cynical mind resistant to the concept of faith-based rituals. But as she practiced the chants, as she focused on the symbols, as she allowed herself to suspend her disbelief, she began to feel something shift within her. A warmth, a subtle energy, a sense of connection to something larger than herself, something akin to the Everlight the sisters spoke of. It was a fragile feeling, easily dismissed by her ingrained cynicism, but it was there, a faint spark in the darkness of her heart. Elias, too, approached the rituals with a pragmatic skepticism, but he applied his methodical mind to mastering the chants, to executing the gestures with precision, to understanding the underlying principles behind the symbols. He saw the rituals not as acts of blind faith, but as tools, techniques, strategies in their fight against the Umbra. And as he practiced, he began to feel a different kind of shift within himself, a sense of focus, of control, of purpose that had been absent from his life for too long. The sisters provided them with simple tools for their preparations, small vials of consecrated oil, blessed candles made from pure beeswax, pouches of fragrant herbs, and small wooden carvings of the Everlight symbol. These were not weapons in the conventional sense, but tools of faith, conduits of light, defenses against the shadows. As they prepared, Sister Agnes spoke of the nature of the Umbra's manifestations, of the shadowy figures Anya had encountered. These are not the Umbra itself, seekers, she explained. They are emanations, fragments of its essence, extensions of its will, sent forth to scout, to test, to feed, to prepare the way for its full manifestation. They are dangerous, but they are not invincible. They are vulnerable to the light of the Everlight, to the rituals of warding and purification. Sister Martha added, "The shadowy figure you encountered, Seeker Anya, it was likely drawn to you by your curiosity, by your investigation into the dead foams. The Umbra is aware of your actions. It is watching you, testing you. You must be vigilant, you must be prepared for further encounters." The mention of the shadowy figure sent a shiver down Anya's spine, the memory of its glowing green eyes, its guttural growl, still vivid in her mind. She knew the sisters were right. They were not just investigating the Umbra, they were now being actively targeted by it, drawn into a conflict far larger and more dangerous than they had initially imagined. But fear was no longer her primary emotion. It was still there, a cold undercurrent, but it was now mingled with resolve, with a sense of purpose, with a fragile flicker of hope. She was armed with knowledge, with rituals, with the guidance of the Order of the Everlight. She was no longer just a cynical recycler. She was a seeker of truth, a warrior against the shadows, a protector of Gloomhaven. As the first faint rays of the perpetually obscured Gloomhaven sun struggled to pierce the smog-choked sky, casting a weak, diffused light into the sanctuary, Sister Agnes and Sister Martha turned to Anya and Elias, their hooded gazes filled with a mixture of hope and concern. "The time for preparation is drawing to a close, seekers," Sister Agnes said, her gentle voice firm. "The Umbra's influence is growing stronger, the darkness in Gloomhaven is deepening. You must now decide your path. Will you venture into the shadows, into the heart of the darkness, to confront the Umbra and fight for the light of Gloomhaven?" Sister Martha added, her deeper voice resonating with ancient resolve, "The path is perilous, fraught with danger and uncertainty. But the Everlight will guide you if you remain true to your purpose, if you keep faith in your hearts. What is your decision, seekers? Will you stand against the Umbra?" Anya looked at Elias and Elias looked back at her. In the dim light of the sanctuary, their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them, a shared commitment to the task ahead. They had come a long way from the grimy recycling center, from the darkened streets of the old docks, from their initial skepticism and cynicism. They had learned about an ancient entity, about a hidden war against the shadows, about the fragile power of light in the face of overwhelming darkness. And they had made a choice. Anya turned back to the sisters, her gaze steady, her voice firm, the cynicism in her tone replaced by a quiet resolve. "We will," she said. "We will stand against the Umbra. We will fight for Gloomhaven. Tell us what to do. Tell us where to go. We are ready." Elias nodded in agreement, his gaze unwavering, his voice echoing Anya's resolve. "We are ready," he repeated. "Lead us to the shadows. We will confront the Umbra." Sister Agnes and Sister Martha smiled, a subtle warmth radiating from their hooded figures, a sense of quiet satisfaction, a flicker of hope in the face of Gloomhaven's encroaching darkness. "Then let us begin," Sister Agnes said, her gentle voice filled with purpose. "The Codex Umbra speaks of a place, a nexus of shadow, a point of convergence where the Umbra's influence is strongest, where its physical manifestations are most frequent. It is an ancient site, forgotten by most, hidden in the depths of the city, a place known as the Shadowed Crossroads. It is there, seekers, that you must begin your fight. It is there that you must confront the Umbra." Sister Martha stepped forward, placing a hand on Anya's shoulder, her touch surprisingly firm. "The Shadowed Crossroads is a dangerous place, seeker," she warned, her deep voice somber. "It is a place of darkness, of despair, of ancient evil, but it is also the key. If you can weaken the Umbra at its nexus, you may be able to stem its tide to protect Gloomhaven from its hunger. But be warned, the shadows there are deep, and the Umbra's power is strong. You must be brave, you must be vigilant, and you must never lose faith in the Everlight." Anya nodded, her heart pounding in her chest, fear and resolve warring within her. The Shadowed Crossroads, a nexus of shadow, a place of ancient evil. It sounded terrifying, almost impossible. But they had come too far to turn back now. They had learned too much, they had promised too much, they had glimpsed a flicker of hope in the darkness, and they couldn't let it die. "We will go to the Shadowed Crossroads," Anya said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "We will face the Umbra. We will fight for Gloomhaven. Guide us, sisters, show us the way." Sister Agnes and Sister Martha smiled again, their hooded figures radiating a quiet strength, a sense of ancient wisdom, a fragile beacon of light in the heart of Gloomhaven's perpetual twilight. "We will, seekers," Sister Agnes said, her gentle voice filled with purpose. "We will guide you to the Shadowed Crossroads. We will arm you with the tools of the Everlight. And we will pray for your success, for the light to prevail against the shadows, for Gloomhaven to be saved from the Umbra's ancient hunger." The smooth transition into the next part of the story was now set. Anya and Elias, armed with knowledge from the Codex Umbra and tools from the Order of the Everlight, are about to embark on their perilous journey to the Shadowed Crossroads, the nexus of the Umbra's power, ready to confront the ancient entity and begin their fight to save Gloomhaven from the encroaching darkness. Sister Agnes and Sister Martha led Anya and Elias back through the dimly lit corridor, returning them to the simple chapel. The other hooded figures remained silently kneeling in prayer, their unwavering devotion a stark contrast to the looming chaos outside. Sister Agnes approached the altar, her movements graceful and deliberate, and from beneath the intricately carved sun symbol, she retrieved two small, intricately worked silver pendants. Each pendant depicted the radiant sun of the Everlight, its rays emanating outwards in a delicate, almost ethereal design. "These are amulets of Everlight," Sister Agnes explained, her gentle voice resonating in the quiet chapel. "They are blessed and consecrated, imbued with the power of the Everlight. Wear them close to your hearts, seekers. They will offer you a measure of protection against the Umbra's influence, a shield against the shadows that seek to consume you." She presented one pendant to Anya and one to Elias, her touch light and almost ethereal. Anya accepted the pendant, its silver cool against her palm. She examined it closely, the intricate details of the sun symbol surprisingly detailed for such a small object. A faint warmth seemed to emanate from it, a subtle energy that resonated against her skin, a feeling that was both comforting and strangely invigorating. She slipped the pendant over her head, letting it rest against her chest, beneath her jacket. A subtle shift occurred within her, a feeling of grounding, of stability, as if a small beacon of light had been ignited within her own being. Elias also accepted his pendant, examining it with a more pragmatic gaze, but even he seemed to be affected by its presence. He fastened it around his neck, tucking it beneath his collar, his usual weary posture straightening slightly, a flicker of renewed resolve in his eyes. "Thank you, sisters," Elias said, his voice more earnest than Anya had ever heard it. "We will wear them with gratitude and respect." Sister Martha stepped forward, carrying two small, worn leather pouches. "These contain consecrated herbs and blessed beeswax candles," she said, her deeper voice resonant. "The herbs can be burned as incense to purify areas tainted by the Umbra's presence to ward off its influence. The candles, when lit with intention and faith, will create pockets of ever light, pushing back the shadows, revealing the Umbra's manifestations." She handed a pouch to Anya and one to Elias. Anya opened her pouch, inhaling the fragrant aroma of dried herbs, lavender, rosemary, and something else, something subtly spicy and grounding. The beeswax candles were small and simple, but they felt solid and substantial in her hand, radiating a faint warmth, echoing the feeling of the pendant against her chest. Elias examined his pouch with a more practical eye, nodding in understanding, tucking it into his coat pocket. "Remember the rituals we taught you seekers," Sister Agnes reminded them, her gentle voice firm. "The chants, the gestures, the symbols of ever light, they are your weapons against the Umbra, your defenses against the shadows. Use them wisely, use them with faith, and the ever light will guide your steps." Sister Martha added, "The shadowed crossroads is a place of great darkness, a nexus of the Umbra's power. Be vigilant, be cautious, be prepared for anything. The Umbra will test you, it will try to break your resolve, to feed on your fear. But remember, the Everlight is stronger than any shadow. Hold fast to your faith, trust in the light within, and you may yet prevail." Anya and Elias nodded, absorbing the sisters' final words of guidance and warning. They were armed with knowledge, with tools, with a fragile shield of faith, but they were also facing an ancient entity, a shadowy enemy whose power was vast and unknown. Fear still lingered, a cold undercurrent beneath their resolve, but it was now mingled with a sense of purpose, a determination to fight, to protect Gloomhaven from the encroaching darkness. As they prepared to leave the sanctuary, Anya's gaze fell once more upon the bin of dead phones she had brought with her, still sitting in a corner of the chapel, the eerie green glow of their screens, a stark reminder of the cryptic message that had started their journey. She approached the bin, drawn by a sudden, almost intuitive pull, a feeling that these discarded devices held more significance than she had initially realized. She picked up one of the phones, a cheap, generic model, its screen still glowing with the chilling warning, "Beware the Umbra, it hungers." She turned it over in her hands, examining it closely, running her fingers over the smooth plastic casing, the dead screen, the empty battery compartment. It was still vibrating faintly, the subtle thrumming resonating in her fingertips, a silent pulse of unseen energy. As she held the phone, staring at the cryptic message, a thought sparked in her mind, a sudden flash of insight that made her breath catch in her throat. The message, it wasn't just a warning, it was a signal. The green glow, the vibration, the guttural sound, they weren't just random phenomena, they were purposeful emanations, directed, controlled, manipulated. And the phones, they weren't just passive recipients of the message, they were active participants, conduits, transmitters. The Umbra was using technology, discarded technology, dead technology, to communicate, to warn, to something else. And if it could use technology to communicate, could it also be vulnerable to technology? Could the signals, the energy, the very essence of these devices be manipulated, not just to receive messages, but to send them back, to disrupt the Umbra, to fight back against the darkness? Anya's mind raced, her cynical pragmatism suddenly merging with the esoteric knowledge she had gleaned from the Codex Umbra. The sisters had spoken of the Everlight as a force, a cosmic principle of light and order opposing the Umbra's chaos and darkness. And technology, in its own way, was also a force, a manifestation of human ingenuity, of order imposed upon chaos, a different kind of light, a different kind of energy. Could these two forces, the ancient power of the Everlight and the modern power of technology, be combined, amplified, directed against the Umbra? She looked at Elias, her eyes wide with dawning realization, her voice filled with a newfound excitement. "Elias," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but urgent with intensity. "The phones, they're not just warnings, they're keys, they're signals. I think we can use them, not just to receive messages but to send them, to create light, to fight back." Elias, who had been preparing his own pouch of herbs, turned to her, his brow furrowed in confusion, then slowly widening with dawning understanding as he saw the intensity in Anya's eyes, the spark of insight that had ignited within her. He approached her, his gaze fixed on the phone in her hand, his detective's mind suddenly clicking into gear, recognizing the potential, the unexpected opportunity that Anya had stumbled upon. "What do you mean, Anya?" he asked, his voice sharp, his weariness momentarily forgotten. "Use them how? Create light. These are dead phones, Anya, they're useless." "Not useless, Elias," Anya insisted, her voice gaining confidence, her cynicism now completely replaced by a surge of focused energy. "Not if we can manipulate their signals. Not if we can find a way to channel the Everlight through them, to amplify their energy, to turn them into beacons of light in the darkness." She held up the phone, her gaze fixed on the glowing screen, her mind racing, piecing together the fragments of knowledge from the Codex Umbra, the whispers of ancient lore, and her own intuitive understanding of technology. "The sisters spoke of rituals, of symbols of faith," she continued, her voice gaining momentum. "But maybe technology can be another kind of ritual, another kind of symbol, another way to channel faith, to focus intention, to manifest the Everlight in the physical world. Maybe we can hack the Umbra, Elias. Maybe we can use its own messengers against it." Elias stared at the phone, then at Anya, his brow furrowed in thought, his detective's mind rapidly processing the implications of her words. Hacking the Umbra, using technology against an ancient shadow entity. It sounded absurd, almost ludicrous, yet in the context of Gloomhaven's blackout, in the face of the inexplicable phenomena they had witnessed, in the light of the sisters' ancient lore, it also sounded possible, intriguing, potentially brilliant. "How, Anya?" Elias asked, his voice now filled with a cautious excitement, a flicker of the old detective's intellectual curiosity. "How would we do that? Manipulate their signals, channel the Everlight? It sounds complicated." Anya shrugged, a confident grin spreading across her face, her cynicism completely banished, replaced by a spark of almost reckless optimism. "I don't know yet, Elias," she admitted. "But I'm a recycler, remember. I know how these things work. I know how to take them apart, put them back together, rewire them, repurpose them. And I've learned something about the Everlight, about its symbols, about its power. Maybe if we combine the two, if we experiment, if we tinker, we can find a way to make these dead phones alive again. In a different way, a way that can fight the Umbra." She looked at the bin of phones, her eyes gleaming with anticipation, a sense of purpose, a spark of defiant ingenuity. "Let's take them with us, Elias," she said, her voice firm, decisive. "All of them, they're not just warnings, they're weapons. And I think we're about to learn how to use them." Elias stared at Anya, then at the bin of glowing phones, then back at Anya, a slow smile spreading across his own face, mirroring her newfound excitement. The disgraced detective, the cynical recycler, standing together in the dim light of the sanctuary, armed with ancient lore, blessed amulets, and a bin full of dead phones, ready to embark on a desperate, almost impossible mission to save Gloomhaven from an ancient shadow. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, a fight against overwhelming odds, but for the first time in a long time they felt a flicker of hope, a spark of defiance. A sense that even in the deepest darkness, even against the most ancient hunger, light could still be found, and perhaps even amplified through the most unexpected of means. "All right, Anya," Elias said, his voice filled with a renewed energy, a spark of his old detective's fire rekindled. "Let's do it. Let's take these phones. Let's see if we can hack the Umbra." He grabbed the bin of phones, hefting it easily, his weariness seemingly banished by the prospect of action, by the thrill of the unexpected. "Lead the way, Anya," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "Let's go to the shadowed crossroads, and let's take the light with us, in our pockets." Anya grinned back, her heart pounding with anticipation, adrenaline surging through her veins. She slung her backpack over her shoulder, adjusted her Everlight pendant, and picked up her pouch of consecrated herbs and beeswax candles. She was no longer just a recycler, no longer just a seeker of truth, no longer just a warrior against the shadows. She was something more, something new, something technological. She was Anya, the Umbra hacker, and she was ready to bring light to the darkness, one dead phone at a time. The smooth transition into the next part of the story was now set. Anya and Elias, armed with their knowledge, tools, and the bin of dead phones, are ready to leave the sanctuary and embark on their journey to the shadowed crossroads, prepared to experiment with the phones and find a way to manipulate their signals to fight the Umbra. They stepped out of the chapel and back into the dimly lit corridor, the hooded sisters accompanying them to the sanctuary entrance. As they walked, Anya cradled the bin of phones, a strange mix of anticipation and nervousness fluttering in her stomach. The weight of the bin was physical, but the weight of the task ahead felt far heavier, a burden of responsibility and uncertainty. Elias, carrying his own pouch of herbs and candles, walked beside her, a determined set to his jaw, his eyes scanning the shadows, his senses on high alert. The silver pendant of the Everlight felt warm against Anya's skin, a subtle reassurance, a fragile beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. Reaching the sanctuary entrance, a heavy wooden door that seemed to melt seamlessly into the surrounding stone wall, Sister Agnes and Sister Martha stopped, their hooded figures radiating a quiet strength and unwavering faith. Sister Agnes placed a hand gently on Anya's arm, her touch surprisingly light but firm. "The shadowed crossroads lies in the old quarter, Seeker," she said, her voice soft but clear. "It is a place of ancient decay, a forgotten nexus where the veils between worlds are thin. Follow the old cobblestone paths, seek out the ruins of the first cathedral, and you will find it. But be warned, the path is fraught with peril, and the Umbra's influence is strong there. Trust in the Everlight, trust in your instincts, and trust in each other." Sister Martha stepped forward, her deeper voice resonating with solemnity. "The shadowed crossroads is not merely a place, Seekers," she said. "It is a state of being, a convergence of shadows, a reflection of Gloomhaven's own darkness. You will face not only physical dangers there, but also trials of the spirit, temptations of despair, whispers of doubt. Resist them, Seekers. Hold fast to the light within, and do not succumb to the shadows that will seek to consume you." She paused, her gaze seeming to pierce through Anya's cynicism, reaching something deeper within. "And remember, Seeker Anya, the phones you carry, they are not merely tools of technology. They are conduits of intention, vessels of hope. Channel your will, your faith, your light through them, and they may yet become beacons in the darkness, weapons against the Umbra's hunger." Anya nodded, absorbing the sister's words, their warnings and their encouragement echoing in her mind. She looked at Elias, and he nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of the challenges ahead, a shared commitment to facing them together. "We understand, sisters," Anya said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "We will be vigilant, we will be cautious, and we will not lose faith. Thank you for your guidance, for your sanctuary, for your hope." Elias echoed her thanks, his voice more earnest than Anya had ever heard it. "We are grateful, sisters," he said, "for everything." He bowed his head slightly in respect, and Anya followed suit. Sister Agnes and Sister Martha returned the gesture, their hooded figures radiating a sense of blessing, a silent farewell. Then, with a final nod, Anya and Elias turned and stepped through the sanctuary entrance, back into the dimly lit alleyway outside. The Gloomhaven air hit them like a cold shroud, heavy with smog and the pervasive scent of decay. The weak gray light of the perpetually obscured dawn struggled to penetrate the smog, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and shift in the alleyway. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of the city's unseen machinery and the occasional creak of rusted metal. The old districts felt even more deserted than before, the darkness deeper, more menacing, as if the Umbra's influence had intensified during their time in the sanctuary. Anya hefted the bin of phones more securely, adjusting her grip, her headlamp beam cutting a weak swathe through the gloom. Elias led the way, his gaze sharp, scanning the alleyway, his senses on high alert. They were back in the Gloomhaven darkness, back in the city's underbelly, but they were no longer just adrift, no longer just witnesses to the encroaching shadows. They had a purpose, a destination, a fragile hope to cling to, and a bin full of dead phones that Anya believed could be transformed into weapons of light. "The old quarter," Elias murmured, consulting his mental map of Gloomhaven, his detective's mind already strategizing their route. "It's to the north, further into the older parts of the city, deeper into the decay. We need to be careful. Syndicate territory extends this far, and after last night they'll be looking for us." He glanced at Anya, a grin set to his jaw. "And it's not just the Syndicate we need to worry about anymore. The Umbra it knows we're investigating, the shadowy figure. It was a warning. They'll be watching us, testing us, maybe even hunting us." Anya nodded, her heart pounding in her chest, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through her veins. "We'll be careful, Elias," she said, her voice firm, trying to mask the tremor of apprehension beneath her resolve. We have the amulets, the herbs, the candles, and we have the phones. We're not defenseless anymore. We have light in our pockets. She tapped the bin of phones, a defiant grin spreading across her face. Let's go hack some shadows. They set off, moving cautiously through the deserted alleyways, sticking to the shadows, their headlamp beams dimmed, their senses on high alert. Elias led the way, his movements agile, his gaze scanning their surroundings, his years of experience navigating Gloomhaven's underbelly proving invaluable. Anya followed close behind, carrying the bin of phones, her hand instinctively resting on the pouch of consecrated herbs in her pocket, the silver amulet of Everlight warm against her chest, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. As they walked, Anya couldn't resist the urge to start experimenting with the phones. She slowed her pace slightly, allowing Elias to take the lead and carefully place the bin on the ground in a shadowed alcove. She pulled out one of the phones, a cheap, generic model, the screen still glowing with the eerie green message. She examined it closely, running her fingers over the casing, the screen, the ports, searching for any clue, any point of entry, any way to manipulate its signals. "What are you doing, Anya?" Elias asked, glancing back at her, his voice low, cautious. "We need to keep moving. We can't linger here, it's too exposed." "Just a minute, Elias," Anya said, her voice focused, her attention completely absorbed by the phone in her hand. "I want to see if I can figure out how these things work, how they're receiving the message, how they're vibrating, how they're glowing." She pulled out her utility knife, the small blade glinting weakly in the dim light, and started carefully prying open the casing of the phone, her recycler's instincts kicking in, her fingers moving with practiced ease. Elias watched her, his brow furrowed in concern, but he didn't object, understanding Anya's urgency, her drive to understand the technology, to find a way to weaponize the dead phones. He kept watch, scanning the alleyway, his senses on high alert, guarding their makeshift laboratory in the shadowed alcove. Anya worked quickly, methodically, her headlamp beam illuminating the inner workings of the phone. She disconnected the screen, examined the circuit board, traced the wiring, trying to decipher the flow of energy, the source of the strange phenomena. The phone was undeniably dead, no battery, no power source, yet the screen continued to glow, the vibration persisted, the guttural sound, though faint, still emanated from the speaker. It defied logic, defied conventional technology. It was something else. "It's like there's a residual energy," Anya murmured, her voice thoughtful, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Something non-electrical, something shadow-like." She recalled the sister's words about the Umbra, about its nature as a shadow entity, a force of darkness, a hunger born of the void. Could the Umbra be imbuing these dead phones with its own energy, its own shadowlight, using them as conduits, as messengers, as tools? She examined the circuit board more closely, noticing faint, almost imperceptible markings, symbols etched into the metal, symbols that were not part of the phone's original design, symbols that seemed ancient, almost organic, like veins of shadow tracing across the circuits. She recognized some of them, distorted, simplified versions of symbols from the Codex Umbra, symbols of Everlight, symbols of warding, but twisted, corrupted, inverted, imbued with a malevolent energy. "Elias, look at this," Anya said, her voice low, urgent, pointing to the markings on the circuit board. Symbols, ancient symbols, etched into the phone. It's like the Umbra is rewriting the technology, corrupting it, imbuing it with its own shadow energy. Elias leaned closer, examining the markings, his detective's mind trying to decipher their meaning, their purpose. "Symbols," he murmured, his brow furrowed. "Like runes, like the symbols in the Codex Umbra." Anya nodded, her gaze intense, her mind racing, piecing together the puzzle. "Yes, but twisted, corrupted. Like the Umbra is mimicking the Everlight, perverting its symbols, turning them to its own dark purpose. It's like it's trying to use technology against itself, against the light, against order." She paused, her eyes widening with dawning realization. "But if it can corrupt technology, maybe we can purify it. Maybe we can rewrite the symbols, cleanse the energy, turn these phones back towards the Everlight, turn them into beacons of light, weapons against the Umbra." Elias stared at her, his gaze filled with a mixture of skepticism and fascination. "Rewrite the symbols, cleanse the energy. Anya, you're talking about hacking ancient shadow magic with dead phones. It sounds insane." Anya grinned, a spark of reckless optimism igniting within her. Maybe it is Ilia's, she said, her voice filled with a defiant energy. But what other choice do we have? We have the Codex Umbra, we have the Sister's Guidance, we have the Everlight amulets, and we have a bin full of dead phones that are already glowing with shadow energy. Maybe insanity is exactly what we need to fight the Umbra. Maybe we need to meet shadow with light, darkness with technology, ancient magic with modern ingenuity. Maybe we can hack the darkness, Ilias. Maybe we can rewrite the Umbra's code. She looked at him, her eyes gleaming with determination, a spark of defiant hope in the face of overwhelming darkness. Are you with me, Ilias? Are you ready to get insane? Ilias stared back at her, a slow smile spreading across his face, mirroring her reckless optimism, her defiant energy. The disgraced detective, the cynical recycler, standing together in a shadowed alleyway, armed with a utility knife, a bin of dead phones, and a crazy idea to hack ancient shadow magic with technology. It was insane, it was desperate, it was almost certainly doomed to fail. But in the face of the encroaching Gloomhaven darkness, in the shadow of the Umbra's ancient hunger, it was also their only hope. And for Ilias, for Anya, for Gloomhaven, hope, however fragile, however insane, was a weapon worth wielding. Insanity it is, Anya, Ilias said, his voice firm, a grin spreading across his face, a flicker of the old detective's fire rekindled in his eyes. Let's get to work, let's hack some shadows. He picked up the bin of phones, hefting it easily, his weariness completely banished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline, a thrill of the impossible, a desperate hope for the improbable. Lead the way, Anya, he said, his voice filled with a newfound energy. Let's find the shadowed crossroads. And let's take our insane plan with us. Maybe, just maybe, it'll be crazy enough to work. Anya grinned back, her heart pounding with anticipation, a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She carefully reassembled the phone, tucking it back into the bin, her mind already racing, formulating plans, imagining possibilities, envisioning a future where dead phones could become beacons of light, weapons against the Umbra's ancient hunger. She picked up her headlamp, adjusted her Everlight pendant, and slung her backpack over her shoulder, a sense of purpose, a spark of defiant ingenuity burning brightly within her. Let's go, Ilias, she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering, to the shadowed crossroads and to the impossible. They left the shadowed alcove, venturing back into the deserted alleyway, their footsteps echoing softly on the cobblestone path, their headlamp beams cutting through the Gloomhaven gloom, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear, hope, and a reckless, defiant determination. The shadowed crossroads awaited, a nexus of darkness, a place of ancient evil, a battleground where the fate of Gloomhaven would be decided. And Anya and Ilias, armed with ancient lore, blessed amulets, and a bin full of dead phones, were ready to face it, ready to fight, ready to hack the shadows, ready to bring light to the deepest darkness of their city. The journey to the shadowed crossroads had begun, a perilous quest into the heart of the Umbra's domain, a desperate gamble on the power of light, technology, and a little bit of glorious Gloomhaven-style insanity. The smooth story transition is set, leading directly into their arrival at the shadowed crossroads and the start of their confrontation. They moved with a renewed sense of purpose, their footsteps echoing on the deserted cobblestone streets, the bin of dead phones bumping gently against Ilias' side. The old quarter was even more dilapidated than the old docks, a skeletal framework of crumbling buildings and shadowed alleyways, a place where time seemed to have stagnated, leaving behind only decay and forgotten memories. The air was heavier here, thick with dust and the cloying sweetness of mildew, a scent of ancient dampness that seemed to seep into their bones. The already pervasive Gloomhaven twilight deepened into near-total darkness, the smog-choked sky offering no hint of dawn, only a suffocating blanket of gloom. As they ventured deeper into the old quarter, the feeling of being watched intensified, a palpable pressure that made Anya's skin prickle and the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. The shadows seemed to deepen, to coalesce, to take on a more menacing quality, as if the very darkness itself was sentient, aware of their presence, and subtly hostile. The silence was almost absolute, a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to swallow sound, broken only by the distant, unsettling whispers of the wind through broken windows and crumbling archways. "This place, it feels different," Anya murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, her headlamp beam cutting nervously through the oppressive gloom. Colder, darker, heavier. Ilias nodded grimly, his gaze scanning the darkened streets, his senses on high alert. "The sisters were right," he said, his voice low, cautious. "This is a nexus of shadow. The Umbra's influence is stronger here. Be vigilant, Anya, and keep your hand on that pouch of herbs. We might need them sooner than we think." They moved more cautiously now, sticking to the deepest shadows, their footsteps muffled, their headlamp beams dimmed to barely penetrate the gloom. They navigated through narrow alleyways, past crumbling facades and around piles of debris that littered the streets, remnants of a city slowly succumbing to decay. The silence was broken only by their own hushed breaths and the occasional scuttling sound from the shadows, unseen creatures moving in the darkness, adding to the growing sense of unease. As they rounded a corner, emerging into a wider street, Anya suddenly stopped, her hand gripping Ilia's arm, her senses on high alert. "Wait," she whispered, her voice tense. "Did you hear that?" Ilias froze, his gaze sharpening, his head cocked to one side, listening intently. At first there was only silence, the oppressive silence of the old quarter. But then faintly, almost imperceptibly, Anya heard it again. A low, guttural growl, distant but distinct, echoing through the darkened streets. A sound that sent a shiver down her spine. A sound that resonated with the memory of the shadowy figure in the recycling center. "The Umbra," Anya breathed, her voice barely audible. "It's here or close." Ilias nodded grimly, his hand instinctively reaching inside his coat, presumably for the pepper spray he had used against the syndicate thugs. "Stay close, Anya," he murmured, his voice low, urgent. "And get those herbs ready. We might not be able to outrun it this time." They moved forward again, their pace quickening, their senses on high alert, the low growl echoing in the distance, growing slightly louder with each step, a chilling reminder of the ancient hunger that lurked in the shadows of the old quarter. They were no longer just searching for the shadowed crossroads. They were being drawn towards it, pulled by an unseen force, guided by the Umbra's growing presence, walking deeper into its domain, into the heart of the darkness. As they walked, Anya couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not just by unseen eyes, but by something more, something ancient, something aware of their intentions, their fears, their fragile hope. The shadows seemed to writhe and shift around them, taking on indistinct shapes, whispering secrets in the darkness, testing their resolve, probing their defenses. The air grew colder, or perhaps it was just the chill of fear seeping into her bones. A cold dread that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the old quarter, from the ancient darkness that permeated this forgotten corner of Gloomhaven. They continued their search, following the vague directions given by the sisters, seeking the ruins of the first cathedral, the supposed marker of the shadowed crossroads. The cobblestone paths were overgrown with weeds, cracked and uneven, treacherous to walk on in the near-total darkness. The buildings around them were increasingly dilapidated, many reduced to mere shells, their roofs collapsed, their windows broken, their interiors open to the elements, gaping voids of darkness that seemed to swallow light and sound. The old quarter was a city of ghosts, a place where the past lingered in the ruins, whispering forgotten stories in the wind, a place where the Umbra thrived, feeding on the decay, the despair, the absence of light. After what felt like hours of wandering through the labyrinthine streets, Anya spotted something in the distance, a darker shape against the oppressive gloom, a towering silhouette that rose above the crumbling buildings, a skeletal outline against the smog-choked sky. She squinted, her headlamp beam cutting through the darkness, trying to make out the shape, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. "Ilias, look," Anya whispered, pointing towards the silhouette. "Up ahead is that." Ilias followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing, his brow furrowing in concentration. He studied the silhouette for a moment, his detective's mind piecing together the fragments of information, the whispers of lore, the sisters' directions. Then slowly he nodded, a grim set to his jaw. "The first cathedral," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Those are the ruins, we found it, the shadowed crossroads." They quickened their pace, moving towards the towering silhouette, their footsteps echoing on the deserted streets, the low growl still echoing in the distance, growing slightly louder, closer, more menacing. As they approached the ruins of the first cathedral, the atmosphere changed again, the darkness deepening, the silence becoming even more oppressive, the sense of dread intensifying, a palpable weight pressing down on them, making it harder to breathe, harder to think, harder to resist the encroaching shadows. The first cathedral was a colossal ruin, a skeletal framework of crumbling stone and shattered arches, a monument to a forgotten faith, a testament to the relentless decay of Gloomhaven. Its once towering spires were broken and jagged, reaching up into the smog-choked sky like skeletal fingers clawing at the darkness. Its walls were scarred and blackened, covered in moss and lichen, crumbling under the weight of centuries. Its interior was a vast, empty void, open to the elements, filled with rubble and debris, a desolate space where shadows danced and whispers echoed, a place where the Umbra's presence felt almost overwhelming. In the heart of the ruins, where the nave of the cathedral would have stood, Anya and Elias found the shadowed crossroads. It was not a crossroads in the conventional sense, not a place where streets intersected, but a convergence of shadows, a point of intersection of unseen energies, a nexus of darkness that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath their feet. The air here was colder, denser, almost viscous, making it difficult to breathe. The shadows were deeper, more profound, swirling and coalescing in the dim light of their headlamps, taking on indistinct shapes, whispering secrets in the darkness, mocking their fragile hope, amplifying their deepest fears. The low growl was no longer distant. It was all around them, emanating from the shadows, from the ruins, from the very air they breathed, a constant, menacing presence, a chilling reminder of the ancient hunger that surrounded them. As they stood at the shadowed crossroads, the weight of the Umbra's presence pressing down on them, Anya felt a sudden, sharp intensification of her connection to the dead phones. The bin of phones, which Elias had placed on the ground beside them, began to vibrate more intensely, the green glow of their screens pulsing brighter, faster, the guttural sound emanating from them growing louder, more resonant, a chorus of digital whispers in the oppressive darkness. It was as if the phones were reacting to the Umbra's proximity, resonating with its shadow energy, amplifying its presence, becoming conduits for its will, messengers of its ancient hunger. Anya felt a strange sensation, a tingling in her fingertips, a buzzing in her ears, a subtle pull, a connection forming between herself and the phones, between herself and the Umbra, a sense of being drawn into the darkness, of becoming a part of the shadow entity's domain. The cryptic message on the phone screens, "Beware the Umbra, it hungers," seemed to burn brighter, more urgently, no longer just a warning, but a summons, a call to the darkness, a beckoning to the void. She looked at Elias, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement, her voice barely audible above the whispering phones and the low growl that surrounded them. "Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I can feel them, the phones, they are reacting to this place, to the Umbra. It's like my connection to them is getting stronger. I can almost hear them, not just the sounds, but something else. Whispers, thoughts, feelings from the Umbra through the phones." Elias stared at her, his brow furrowed in concern, then slowly widening with dawning understanding as he saw the intensity in Anya's eyes, the strange pallor of her skin, the almost trance-like quality of her voice. He could see the bin of phones vibrating more intensely, the green glow pulsing brighter, the guttural sound growing louder, the atmosphere around them thickening with an unseen energy, a palpable sense of dread. He could feel it too, a subtle shift in the air, a tingling on his skin, a sense of unease that was escalating into something more profound, more terrifying. "Anya, are you all right?" Elias asked, his voice sharp, urgent, concern etched on his face. "What do you hear? What do you feel?" Anya closed her eyes, her hand reaching out to touch the bin of phones, her fingers brushing against the glowing screens, her connection intensifying, the whispers growing louder, more distinct, no longer just digital murmurs, but almost voices, voices from the shadows, voices of the Umbra. "It's hungry, Elias," she whispered, her voice distant, almost ethereal. "So hungry for darkness, for fear, for light, it wants to consume everything, everything." Her eyes flickered open, her gaze unfocused, almost vacant, her voice taking on a strange, echoing quality, as if she was speaking not just for herself, but for something else, something ancient, something hungry, something lurking in the shadows of the shadowed crossroads. "Beware," Anya whispered, her voice now a chilling echo of the cryptic message on the phones, a warning, a summons, a prophecy. "Beware the Umbra, it hungers." The air around them crackled with unseen energy. The shadows deepened, swirling, coalescing, the guttural growl intensified, echoing through the ruins of the first cathedral, announcing its presence, confirming its hunger, and signaling the beginning of their confrontation at the shadowed crossroads. a desperate battle against an ancient entity, a fight for the light in the heart of Gloomhaven's perpetual twilight, a battle that had just become terrifyingly, undeniably real. The smooth story transition is now set. Anya and Elias are at the shadowed crossroads. Anya's connection to the phones is intensifying, and the Umbra's presence is becoming palpable, setting the stage for their initial confrontation and Anya's first attempt to weaponize the phones. "Anya, are you all right?" Elias asked again, his voice sharper this time, laced with a rising urgency. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, a grounding touch in the swirling chaos of shadows and whispers. His touch seemed to break through the encroaching trance, pulling Anya back from the edge of the void. Anya blinked, her eyes refocusing, the vacant, echoing quality fading, replaced by a flicker of her own awareness, her own fear. She gasped, taking a shuddering breath, the oppressive air of the shadowed crossroads seeming to rush into her lungs, heavy and cold. I think so," she stammered, her voice still trembling slightly but now recognizably her own. It was overwhelming. The phones in this place, it's like they're amplifying each other. The Umbra, it's right here, Elias. I can feel it. It's hungry. Elias tightened his grip on her shoulder, his gaze scanning their surroundings, his senses on high alert. The low growl had intensified, now a constant, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. The shadows danced and writhed, coalescing into darker, more distinct shapes, swirling around the ruins of the first cathedral like living entities, responding to the Umbra's presence, amplifying its power. "We need to act, Anya," Elias said, his voice firm, decisive, cutting through the oppressive atmosphere. "We can't just stand here and let it consume us. Remember what the sisters taught us. The rituals, the symbols, the Everlight, now's the time to use them. Now's the time to fight back." Anya nodded, her resolve hardening, the fear momentarily overshadowed by a surge of adrenaline, a desperate need for action. She reached for the pouch of consecrated herbs in her pocket, her fingers fumbling slightly as she pulled it out, the fragrant aroma of lavender and rosemary filling the air, a faint scent of hope in the oppressive gloom. "The herbs," she murmured, her voice gaining strength, "to purify the area, to ward it off." She opened the pouch, taking a pinch of the dried herbs, and held them out in her palm, focusing her intention, channeling the fragile spark of faith ignited within her in the sanctuary. She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling the sisters' instructions, the simple chant, the gesture of warding. Then, taking a deep breath, she began to chant, her voice low but clear, echoing in the ruins of the first cathedral, a fragile whisper of light against the encroaching darkness. "Everlight, protect us. Everlight, guide us. Everlight, shield us from the shadows." As she chanted, she scattered the herbs around them, casting them outwards in a wide circle, creating a perimeter of fragrant protection, a fragile barrier against the Umbra's influence. Elias joined her, taking his own pouch of herbs, mirroring her actions, chanting along with her, his voice rougher, less melodic, but equally earnest, equally determined. "Everlight, protect us. Everlight, guide us. Everlight, shield us from the shadows." The scent of the burning herbs intensified, mingling with the damp, earthy odor of the ruins, creating a strange, almost ethereal fragrance that seemed to push back against the oppressive atmosphere, carving out a small pocket of purified air in the heart of the shadowed crossroads. The shadows around them seemed to recoil slightly, the swirling darkness momentarily receding, as if responding to the presence of the Everlight, however faint, however fragile. Anya opened her eyes, her gaze scanning their surroundings, her senses on high alert. The low growl still echoed, the Umbra's presence still palpable, but the immediate sense of overwhelming dread had lessened slightly, replaced by a fragile sense of hope, a temporary reprieve in the face of the encroaching darkness. "It's working," she murmured, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "The herbs, the chant, it's pushing it back, at least for now." Elias nodded grimly, his gaze still scanning the ruins, his hand resting on the pouch of beeswax candles in his pocket. "For now, yes," he said, his voice cautious. "But it won't be enough to stop it, not for long. This is just a temporary warding. We need something stronger, something more permanent." He glanced at the bin of phones beside them, a flicker of anticipation in his eyes. "The phones, Anya, it's time to try your crazy idea. It's time to hack the shadows." Anya's heart pounded with a renewed surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through her veins. The herbs had bought them a moment, a breathing space, but they had also confirmed the Umbra's presence, its power, its proximity. Now it was time to move beyond defense, time to go on the offensive, time to unleash their secret weapon, their bin full of dead phones, their insane plan to hack the shadows. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the bin, her mind racing, formulating a plan, visualizing the possibilities, the potential, the terrifying uncertainty of what they were about to attempt. "All right, Elias," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "Let's do it. Let's see if we can turn these dead phones into beacons of light. Let's see if we can hack the Umbra." She knelt beside the bin, carefully selecting one of the phones, the sleek, expensive model, the one that had seemed to resonate most strongly with the Umbra's presence, the one that felt almost alive in a strange, unsettling way. She held it in her hands, examining it closely, her fingers tracing the smooth casing, the cracked screen, the faint green glow of the cryptic message. "Beware the Umbra, it hungers." The message seemed to burn brighter now, more urgent, more menacing, a challenge, a taunt, a prelude to the confrontation to come. "What do you need, Anya?" Elias asked, his voice sharp, his detective's mind shifting into tactical mode, ready to support her, to protect her, to help her execute her insane plan. "Tools, space, time." "Time mostly," Anya said, her voice focused, her attention completely absorbed by the phone in her hands. "And focus, and maybe a little bit of luck." She pulled out her utility knife again, the small blade glinting weakly in the dim light, and started carefully prying open the casing of the phone, her recycler's instincts kicking in, her fingers moving with practiced ease, but now imbued with a newfound purpose, a desperate hope, a reckless determination. Elias watched her, his gaze scanning their surroundings, his hand resting on the hilt of his utility knife, his senses on high alert, guarding their makeshift laboratory in the heart of the shadowed crossroads, a crumbling ruin bathed in darkness, haunted by an ancient hunger, and about to become the stage for a desperate, almost impossible experiment. A gamble on technology, faith, and a little bit of Gloomhaven-style insanity. The low growl echoed around them, the shadows danced and writhed, the Umbra's presence intensified, sensing their preparations, anticipating their challenge, ready to meet their fragile light with its ancient, overwhelming darkness. Anya worked quickly, methodically, her headlamp beam illuminating the inner workings of the phone, her utility knife flashing in the dim light as she carefully disassembled the device, separating the screen, the circuit board, the speaker, the various components, laying them out on a piece of rubble beside her, creating a makeshift workbench in the heart of the ruins. She examined the circuit board again, the faint, corrupted symbols etched into the metal, the twisted lines of shadow energy that seemed to flow through the circuits, mimicking, perverting the pathways of electricity. "It's like it's using the phone's own systems against itself," Anya murmured, her voice thoughtful, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The Umbra's energy, it's flowing through the circuits, not as electricity, but as shadow light. It's hijacking the technology, turning it into a conduit for its own will, its own message." She pointed to one of the corrupted symbols on the circuit board, a twisted version of the Everlight Sun symbol, inverted, distorted, imbued with a malevolent energy. "And these symbols, they're like control nodes, points of entry for the Umbra's influence. They're rewriting the phone's code, not in software, but in shadow code." Elias leaned closer, examining the circuit board, his detective's mind trying to understand the technological and esoteric puzzle Anya was piecing together. "Shadow code," he murmured, his brow furrowed. "What does that even mean? Can we rewrite it back? Can we counter the Umbra's influence, turn these phones back towards the light?" Anya nodded, her gaze intense, her mind racing, her fingers already moving, reaching for her pouch of beeswax candles, her pouch of consecrated herbs, her Everlight pendant, the tools of faith, the weapons of light. "I think so, Elias," she said, her voice filled with a newfound confidence, a spark of reckless ingenuity. "We need to rewrite the symbols, cleanse the corrupted energy, reprogram the phones, not with software code, but with Everlight code. With faith, with intention, with the power of the sun's symbol." She took out one of the beeswax candles, lighting it with a small lighter she always carried, the fragile flame flickering to life in the dim light, casting a warm, golden glow that seemed to push back against the oppressive gloom, echoing the faint light of the Everlight pendants they wore. She held the candle over the disassembled phone, letting the warm wax drip onto the circuit board, onto the corrupted symbols, onto the pathways of shadow energy, her intention focused, her will unwavering, channeling the fragile spark of faith within her, imbuing the beeswax with the power of the ever-light. "We need to purify the components first," Anya explained, her voice low, focused. "Cleanse them of the umbra's influence, reset them, prepare them to receive the Everlight's energy." She sprinkled a pinch of consecrated herbs over the circuit board, letting the fragrant dust settle on the corrupted symbols, the scent of lavender and rosemary mingling with the smell of burning beeswax, creating a strange, almost alchemical aroma in the ruins of the first cathedral. She then took her Everlight pendant, holding it above the disassembled phone, letting its silver warmth radiate over the components, channeling the power of the sun symbol, invoking the Everlight's protection, its purification, its light. Elias watched her, his skepticism slowly fading, replaced by a growing fascination, a dawning realization that Anya's insane plan might not be so insane after all. He saw the focused intensity in her eyes, the unwavering determination in her movements, the strange, almost ritualistic precision with which she was performing her technological esoteric operation. He saw the flickering candlelight, the fragrant herbs, the radiant amulet, the disassembled phone, a strange tableau of ancient faith and modern technology, converging in the heart of the shadowed crossroads, a desperate attempt to hack the darkness, to rewrite the Umbra's code, to bring light to the deepest gloom of Gloomhaven. As Anya continued her work, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere around them. The low growl seemed to falter slightly. The shadows seemed to flicker, to hesitate, as if reacting to the presence of the Everlight, to the fragile beacon of light Anya was creating in the heart of the ruins. The phones in the bin vibrated less intensely, the green glow of their screens dimming slightly, the guttural sound softening, as if the Umbra's influence was being subtly disrupted, pushed back, weakened by Anya's actions. A faint breeze stirred through the ruins, carrying the scent of incense, beeswax, and consecrated herbs, a whisper of hope in the oppressive gloom, a fragile promise of light in the heart of the shadowed crossroads. Anya looked up at Elias, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, a triumphant grin spreading across her face. I think it's working, Elias," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and awe. I think we might actually be hacking the Umbra. The smooth story transition is now set. Anya and Elias are seeing initial success in their attempt to repurpose the phones, but the Umbra's reaction and the escalating confrontation are imminent. Anya looked up at Elias, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, a triumphant grin spreading across her face. I think it's working, Elias," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and awe. I think we might actually be hacking the Umbra." Elias stared at the disassembled phone, at the flickering candlelight illuminating the circuit board adorned with dripping beeswax and fragrant herbs, at Anya's face alight with a fragile, almost impossible hope. He could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the slight lessening of the oppressive dread, the momentary faltering of the low growl that had been their constant companion. He saw the phones in the bin vibrating less intensely, their eerie green glow dimming almost imperceptibly, like fireflies blinking out in the encroaching twilight. It was subtle, fragile, easily dismissed as wishful thinking, but he couldn't deny the change, the faint whisper of hope that had stirred in the heart of the shadowed crossroads. "It is," Elias murmured, his voice filled with a cautious awe, a flicker of the old detective's skepticism momentarily eclipsed by the unfolding reality. "Something's happening, Anya, something's changing." He knelt beside her, his gaze fixed on the disassembled phone, his detective's mind suddenly grasping the almost ludicrous, yet undeniably effective, nature of her improvised ritual. What's next? How do we amplify it? Turn this flicker of light into something stronger? Anya took a deep breath, her gaze still fixed on the circuit board, her mind racing, piecing together the next steps in her insane plan. "We need to rewrite the symbols," she said, her voice low, focused, her fingers tracing the corrupted lines of shadow energy etched into the metal. "Cleanse the Umbra's influence completely and then reprogram them with the symbols of Everlight. Turn them into conduits of light, beacons against the darkness." She reached for her pouch of beeswax candles again, taking out another candle, lighting it from the flame of the first, adding a second fragile beacon of light to their makeshift laboratory. "And we need more light, Elias," she said, her gaze meeting his, her eyes gleaming with determination. "More Everlight, to fuel the reprogramming, to empower the phones. Elias nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes, his detective's mind now fully engaged in the unfolding operation, shifting from observer to active participant. He reached for his own pouch of beeswax candles, taking out several, lining them up around the disassembled phone, creating a small circle of flickering light, a fragile sanctuary in the heart of the shadowed crossroads. He lit them all, the flames dancing and swaying, casting warm, golden light that pushed back against the oppressive gloom, carving out a slightly larger, slightly brighter pocket of ever-light in the ruins of the first cathedral. Candles, yes, Elias murmured, his voice thoughtful, his gaze fixed on the circle of flickering flames. And the amulets, they're supposed to channel the Everlight's power, right? Maybe we can use them to amplify the signal, to focus the energy, to make the reprogramming stronger. He unclasped his Everlight pendant, holding it in his hand, its silver surface gleaming in the candlelight, its radiant sun symbol radiating a subtle warmth, a tangible sense of energy. "Hold this, Anya," he said, handing her his pendant. "Hold it above the phone, focus your intention, channel your will through it. Let's see if we can amplify the Everlight's influence, rewrite the shadow code, and turn this dead phone into a beacon of light." Anya took Elias' pendant, holding it in her hand alongside her own, the two silver amulets radiating a combined warmth, a stronger sense of energy, a fragile but growing beacon of light in the heart of the shadowed crossroads. She held them above the disassembled phone, closing her eyes, focusing her intention, channeling her will, her faith, her fragile hope through the pendants into the circuit board, into the corrupted symbols, into the pathways of shadow energy. She recalled the sisters' chants, the symbols of Everlight, the descriptions of its power, its purity, its unwavering opposition to the Umbra's darkness. She imagined the sun, the Everlight, not just as a celestial body, but as a force, a cosmic principle of light and order, flowing through the pendants, cleansing the corruption, rewriting the code, transforming the dead phone into a vessel of light. As Anya focused her intention, channeling the Everlight's energy through the pendants, a subtle change began to occur in the disassembled phone. The faint green glow of the screen flickered, then pulsed, then shifted in color, the sickly green fading, replaced by a warmer, softer, almost golden hue, a nascent glow of Everlight struggling to break through the shadows. The vibration of the phone intensified, but now it was different, no longer a guttural thrumming, but a higher-pitched, almost resonant hum, a vibration of energy, of light, of life, struggling to awaken from the digital grave. The corrupted symbols on the circuit board seemed to shimmer, to waver, to fade slightly, as if the Everlight's influence was beginning to cleanse them, to rewrite the shadow code, to reclaim the technology for the light. Elias watched, his breath held tight in his lungs, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and awe, witnessing the impossible unfolding before his eyes. He saw the change in the phone's glow, the shift in its vibration, the subtle fading of the corrupted symbols, the fragile but undeniable evidence that Anya's insane plan was actually working, that they were actually hacking the Umbra, turning its own messengers against it, creating light in the heart of the darkness. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the ruins of the first cathedral, shattering the fragile silence, jolting them both from their focused concentration. The flickering candlelight wavered, the shadows around them deepened, swirling with renewed intensity, the low growl intensified, becoming a menacing roar that echoed through the ruins, shaking the very stones beneath their feet. The Umbra was reacting, sensing their actions, resisting their attempt to hack its messengers, pushing back against the fragile light they were creating in its domain. Anya's eyes snapped open, her gaze wide with alarm, the pendants falling from her trembling hands, clattering onto the rubble beside the disassembled phone. The nascent golden glow of the screen flickered, dimmed, then reverted back to the sickly green, the vibration intensifying again, the guttural thrumming returning, the corrupted symbols on the circuit board regaining their malevolent intensity, the fragile hope of Everlight being extinguished by the encroaching shadows. "It knows," Anya gasped, her voice filled with fear, her gaze darting around the ruins, searching for the source of the sudden escalation, the ominous crack, the intensified growl, the deepening shadows. "It's fighting back, Elias. It doesn't want us to do this. It doesn't want us to rewrite its code." Elias scrambled to his feet, his detective instincts kicking into overdrive, his gaze scanning the ruins, his hand reaching for the pepper spray in his coat pocket, ready to defend them, to protect Anya, to face whatever manifestation of the Umbra was about to emerge from the shadows. "Get back, Anya," he yelled, his voice sharp, urgent. "Get away from the phones, it's coming. I can feel it." The low growl intensified again, becoming a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the first cathedral, the shadows swirling and coalescing into a vortex of darkness, a tangible presence forming in the heart of the ruins, directly in front of them, blocking their escape route, cutting them off from the outside world. The air grew colder, denser, almost suffocating, the oppressive dread returning, amplified, overwhelming, crushing their fragile hope, extinguishing their nascent light, plunging them back into the heart of the Umbra's ancient, overwhelming darkness. From the swirling vortex of shadows, a form began to coalesce, indistinct at first, a shifting mass of darkness, but slowly taking shape, solidifying, becoming more defined, more menacing. Limbs emerged, long and spindly, too thin, too unnatural, stretching out from the swirling mass, clawing at the air, reaching towards them with a terrifying, predatory grace. A head formed, elongated, skull-like, with no discernible features, except for 2 points of light, glowing with an eerie, sickly green luminescence, burning like malevolent embers in the heart of the darkness, fixing on Anya and Elias with an ancient, insatiable hunger. The shadowy figure, the Umbra's manifestation, stood before them, towering and menacing, a creature of pure shadow born from the void, fueled by darkness, driven by an ancient, overwhelming hunger. Its glowing green eyes burned into Anya and Elias, cold, predatory, promising pain, promising consumption, promising the extinguishing of their fragile light, the devouring of their desperate hope, the complete and utter triumph of the shadows. The low growl transformed into a deafening roar, a primal scream of ancient hunger, echoing through the ruins of the first cathedral, announcing its presence, confirming its power, and signaling the beginning of their desperate, terrifying confrontation with the Umbra at the shadowed crossroads. A battle for survival, a fight for the light, a desperate gamble against overwhelming darkness. A confrontation that had just become undeniably, terrifyingly real and undeniably, terrifyingly personal. The smooth story transition is now set. Anya and Elias are face to face with a physical manifestation of the Umbra, and the battle for their survival and potentially Gloomhaven's fate is about to begin.